everyone. Hopefully you're working out how this works this morning, that if you come and join a table, you can have a chat. Now, this is the main session. I'm going to fill for a while as people join us. So my name's Paul Connell from ODI Leeds, soon to be Open Innovations, as we move from being a node of the Open Data Institute to being separate and independent from that. So today is OpenDataSavesLives Unconference and Showcase. This morning we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, all talking about fantastic things they're doing in data, in health, but maybe just a little bit outside of the usual structures of the health sector. Our collaborators in this Beautiful Information will be joining me in a second. Marc Farr from Beautiful Information will be talking about why they joined in with us, where it came from a little bit. Chris Bates from TPP is going to tell us a little bit about TPP's interest, and John O'Connell from SCWCSU is going to be joining us as well in a second to kick us off. So I think just if you can, part of a bit of housekeeping, so rather than tell people about the toilets and where the cups of tea are, you're going to have to sort yourself out with all of that and the emergency exits where you are. I think you should be able to, on your screen, be able to see icons for applause, all the positive icons. I don't think there are any negative icons, so if you want to try that out now, hopefully you can see some of those to let the speakers know that you are engaged. If you look at the functions on the right hand side, you can do a chat to everybody on the right hand side within the chat. When you get back to your tables when it's a tea break or lunch break, you can talk to everyone on the table you're at. You can leave that table if it's not doing it for you and join another one, just like you could in person, I guess. And then if you know someone who's here, or you would like to have a private chat, you can click on the people and send a message direct to somebody. Obviously, please just obey all the normal rules about being respectful and polite in all of this. And the ODI Leeds team are managing the backstage. They're on the tables. You'll see them with their icons. If you need anything, just click on them and ask a question. They'll be able to help you out during the day. So I think if someone from the ODI Leeds team could just message me saying, are we ready to go or not? That would be great. And we'll get our sponsors up to have a word from our sponsors, and also Marc Farr to come and join us in a second, just to tell us why it's important that we do this and what's happening. So we've got John O'Connell from SCWCSU, Chris Bates from TPP, and is Marc there as well? Yeah, Marc as well. So it's all working. The people have joined the stage, and here we are. So I'm going to ask Marc just to help me tell everyone, give us 30 seconds about why Beautiful Information joined in with this and why it's so important and what you'd like to get out today.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for putting this together. A bit of idiosyncrasy for those who don't know, Paul and I have known each other for far too long and went skiing as COVID broke and had a WhatsApp group which shared exactly our symptoms, a month before people were reporting on the BBC about losing their sense of taste. And there was a thing in there about people being happy to share data safely and securely. Data saves lives, etc., etc., etc. And you've seen the latest white paper which talks all about that. So we are a kind of lobby group for that position to safely share data. And I think we've got involved as Beautiful Information just because the pace of innovation that we've seen that's been really challenging for people through COVID, I've found really refreshing. So really excited and looking forward to the day. And thanks everyone for joining in.
Fantastic. And not that I put words in your mouth, but pace is the mantra for Open Innovations, is that if we can kill all reports and actually do things and report back and use the web, I would be a very happy person. So I'm going to ask John next just to let us know about you, your organisation, and why you have got involved in OpenDataSavesLives.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and great to be invited. No, thanks. So, hi, everybody. Really great to join and support this exciting conference. And for those who may not know SCW, we are an NHS support service that helps kind of health and social care, deliver the best possible care and improve people's health and well-being. So in essence, I guess, like many others on the call, it's a big ask, I know, but that's kind of what we're here today. So why, I suppose, OpenDataSavesLives for SCW? I was just thinking back, I think this was quite fortuitous and a bit of foresight, because listening to Dr. Timothy Ferris last week, the new Director of Transformation for the NHS, he mentioned 3 strategic priorities for the NHS. And the first one was looking at redesigning the end-to-end delivery of care. But he said the second piece is underpinned by really insightful and advanced data analytics. And the third thing he mentioned as well was having the NHS as a platform for innovation, working collaboratively with partners and systems. So this is kind of very much at the heart of what those 3 challenges are. And I kind of see, I suppose, OpenDataSavesLives network as an innovative, what I class as a kind of an open enabler that provides SCW with unrivaled access to unique, innovative research across health and care to help tackle those 3 strategic opportunities. So membership to us is really strategically important as we, as Marc was mentioning, help maintain that pace of innovation that we've seen during the pandemic, but also continue. We are doing a lot of transformational change work, but we want to leverage that innovative thinking, leveraging insights from new data to enhance patient care and support the wider community. But most importantly, our class in big brackets is openly. We need to be openly doing this together and build once, very much a culture of build once and share for everybody. So yeah, really, really delighted to be part of this. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity, and thank you for the invite.
Thanks very much, John. And thank you for putting your hand in the pocket to help us springboard off something that was an idea conference between me and Marc, an action that we took. We weren't sure what was going to happen, and then people have seen that actually we can't just talk about this stuff, we need to do it as well. So thanks very much, John. And then Chris, if you could give us just a couple of minutes about why this is very important for TPP and what you'd like to see out of it next.
Sure, yeah. Morning, everyone. So, yeah, I'm Chris Bates. I'm Analytics Director at TPP. We are a clinical systems software supplier and electronic health records provider to the NHS, provide systems for about 7,000 organisations. We've known Paul and Marc and the ODI Leeds team for a number of years now, and it's been great over the last sort of 18 months to see OpenDataSavesLives emerge from, as Marc was saying, that common experience lots of people had about the desire of people to share data for public good and the desire to do things quickly. And I think that's, again, massively what we saw, that when you have that good collaboration between industry, between providers, between the centre, between lots and lots of different people with lots of different skills bases, you can produce something pretty great and pretty quick. So our interest is really in, how do we leverage the power of data? What data can we make open? Of course, healthcare data is about the most sensitive data you can have. So it's a very heavily regulated for good reason environment, but can we leverage those insights? How do we build public trust? How do we bring people along with us? And just as much as the open data side, that, as John was saying, that idea of building an open analytics community and having that commons of knowledge and resources that people can access easily without it being hidden behind firewalls or difficult to get to, so we can genuinely work together. And I think we've seen numerous times during the pandemic where that's the thing that's worked. So our interest is really in building that community, and we're delighted to support ODSL this year.
Fantastic. I couldn't put it better myself. So I think John and Chris have reinforced that myself and Paul and Marc's instincts were that we needed to do this, we should do this, and by doing it, we've allowed Chris and John to join in with what we're doing. So if you are within any other organisations, you have challenges, or you need some help to do it, either we might be able to help you or put you in touch with the people who can. So please join in and work out how best you can help us help you. So thanks very much, Chris and John. Chris is going to be talking later on a pre-record, but he's got to jump on a plane now, so he won't be doing the Q&A. But as a sponsor of OpenDataSavesLives, if you've got any questions about how TPP operate, I know that lots of people do, but obviously you're starting to see their pace of change and their rate of change. They're joining in with all of this. So if you've got any questions about how TPP work or what they need from them, we'll pass them on to Chris, and I'm sure him and his team will deal with that. John's going to be around all day, so you can either direct message him or get in touch with him about the CSU down there. And now we've got a mixture of pre-records and live talks. We picked off quite a few difficult conversations and subjects in OpenDataSavesLives. So we're going to say goodbye to Chris and John now. You're going to be sort of removed from the stage, and Marc is going to give us a talk around inequalities and the variation in health outcomes that you get. And we've got some hard conversations. We need to think carefully about this. Hopefully the technology is going to work. I'm going to try and hide myself. I think that's what I do. And Marc's going to present to the audience. It's a bit like Zoom, Marc. So if you do that, and I'll just try and remove myself if I can. Or if someone can remove me, that'd be great. Over to you, Marc.
I'm going to try and share as if I'm talking. So yeah. I'm going to go for it. Okay.
And we can give everyone a round of applause. So thanks to John and Chris. Over to Marc. It's got to be the round of applause now. Yes, there we go.
Just unhide yourself or unhide the little icon.
Okay. Will you, Paul, just confirm you can see my screen? I'm taking those thumbs as you can see my screen. Happy days. Okay, I'm going to make it even bigger. Okay. Can you see a picture of a condom? Hopefully. Okay. Right. So good to see you all. Can I apologise first for how my title comes across? I put handsome in there, and that was just me being facetious about designation. I wasn't sure what that meant, whether I was supposed to put role or he, him. So if you can hear me okay, I'm going to make a start. I've got about a 15-minute presentation, and Paul and I are together a few times during the day to take questions, and we'll take some in the chat as well. So here's an image, just trying to get your attention. This goes back to some work that myself and Scott Parker and Paul Clark and others who are on the call did back in the day, a number of years. I think I had hair. And we moved on from a Burberry condom to one that had images of genital warts on it as well, when we were involved in social marketing campaigns trying to reduce teenage pregnancy in North London. We did work at football grounds where we gave out magazines encouraging people in a kind of, with a little bit of humour to take better care of themselves. I think Paul and I were involved in a survey where people believed that chips was part of their 5 a day because it was technically a vegetable. And we were at a point where we were just trying to do exactly the jargon that you still hear around reducing inequalities and unwarranted variation. And those terms, if you work in health, you'll hear quite a lot now. They are not new terms, but there's a growing body of evidence which shows that, economically, the difference between the rich and the poor under New Labour has got wider. There's books.
Marc?
Chat. Yes.
Can I pause you for just a second? We can't see your presentation anymore, and there's a beeping noise. Can you try and fix that?
The beeping is people putting their thumbs up. So I will...
Yeah, if you can mute that. It's gone now. Thanks, everyone, for there we go. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Can you see a Burberry condom?
We can. You can begin again. Proving we are live.
Okay, right. I'm going to keep going and unless you jump in and get me to start again, Catherine. So there's 2 points I want you to take away from this. One is that people's life chances are different depending on their socioeconomic background, which you would go, well, obviously that's true. And I think it's something that we've grown to accept, which is part of the problem. And that secondly, that tends to lead to differences in sometimes procedures and treatments that people have. And there's been research in the States that I've been looking at that's been presented quite widely that shows that the NHS unwittingly is racist in terms of handing out job roles to people based on ethnicity, cases of bullying and harassment, but right through to the bit that I'm interested in, which is about, are there variations in your experience and your outcome according to, you could say, 4 characteristics: your age, your sex, your level of deprivation, and your ethnicity. And those 4 can be joined together in a whole range of very clever clustering solutions to say that people live in the chattering class or the graffitied ghettos and so on. So that's one example. You will, I'm sure some of you have probably heard the example of, I'm going to keep sharing, Catherine, because that seems to change. Some of you have probably heard this one, where, you know, in London, as you go east, your chances of living longer literally go down sort of a year a station. This is something I've researched again recently. We found a while ago that there was a statistically significant difference between your chances of having your breast repaired or your breast removed, depending on the socioeconomic background from which you are from. I've kind of looked recently and updated that. There's obviously all this will get shared, and there's some references here for people. So interestingly, by ethnicity, there's a proper paper that's been published in a proper journal, which shows that ethnicity doesn't seem to be a factor, but the work we did originally did show that social class was a factor, and we want to try and address some of that. There's a similar example, sorry, some of these are a bit gruesome, similar example for men. You can imagine if I offered you 2 options, to have your bowel reconstructed and to have a colostomy bag, which one you preferred. There is a statistically significant difference depending on your class on which you're likely to have. And just to kind of bring it even closer to home for some of us, these are the sorts of things you find when you move to a pointy bit of the country surrounded by the sea, that you get very significant differences depending on local diets. I'll let you wince and cross your legs for those of you who live south of London. Okay, just sort of bringing it up to date a little bit then, because those slides, as you can probably tell from them, I haven't looked at for years, and I went off last week to see if I could find them, and they still seem to exist, and some early analysis that we're doing seems to show that those patterns are still there. If you come through to this week with COVID, you can see that the waiting lists get reported as having grown dramatically, and everyone kind of understands why that might happen. What we tend to do very little of, or in not enough detail for me, is analyse how that affects different types of people. So in the case of waiting lists, for example, they've doubled in poorer areas. They've only gone up by about a third in more affluent areas. So even if you start to think about trying to adjust for late presentation, which is the usual kind of get out of jail card, that more middle class people tend to be less embarrassed about symptoms, tend to have researched them better. The fact that waiting lists have jumped during COVID is worrying, I think. In Kent, we have a big traveller population. Travellers tend to have worse outcomes, tend not to be registered with GPs reliably, tend to use emergency departments in a different way to other people, and probably have had lower vaccine uptake as well. So there's a lot of outreach trying to resolve some of that at the moment, but it's just another example of the changes that we've kind of got at the moment. One of the big successes of OpenDataSavesLives, which Paul and I will talk about in a little bit more detail, and it absolutely is an inequality and an awful variation, is the risk of domestic abuse. And that became a big issue during lockdown, kind of a front page of the Sunday newspapers story. And this story, I think, goes right to the heart of what OpenDataSavesLives is about, is to kind of make quite bold decisions about information governance and about linking data from the police to the NHS for purely altruistic purposes. Unfortunately, a lot of the noise about GPs sharing their data under GDPR gets swept into quite general arguments about what's the role of the private sector and so on, forgetting for a moment that GPs are private businesses effectively. if you do it carefully and safely, and you're doing good things, and you can sleep well at night, and you would stand up in court to defend yourself, there's a lot of good, we would say, from linking data together. And looking at domestic abuse is a particularly sensitive example because you're trying to identify families at risk. If you can still see my slides, you'll see our... Sorry about this, I don't know what the experience is like, but my sharing screen keeps dropping out for you. I hope it's not too disruptive. Hopefully you got it back, and you can see Theresa May. That is a Libra patch on her arm. That monitors, she's a diabetic, that monitors her blood sugar. We are increasingly close to a Bluetooth relationship between Libra patch, some sort of small radio, and an insulin pump, where you could actually you could keep your blood sugar at a much flatter level instead of hypoing up and down. Our initial hypothesis, we haven't explored this yet, but from talking to a guy who's a renal physician and a professor at Kent, we think there'll be lots of procedures and treatments that seem to break down on class lines, which in an NHS which is free at the point of care, in theory shouldn't be there. But I'm really interested in how class and ethnicity and deprivation things come into play around people's use of the NHS. And we're not looking at it in much detail yet. I think you'll find from here, I think if those kind of old slides are kind of Tony Blair or how it was and the problem's still there, what's quite good now is things that didn't used to exist. So like the use of open data, the use of, convening of open innovation at pace through Open Data Institute in Leeds, as it was here. One of the CSUs has done some really good work sharing their code around inequalities, looking at variations in referrals, all there, all to be downloaded. Here are the R scripts. If you can get your data organised in the right way, you can run the same analysis. So this didn't used to exist 10 years ago in this way. I think it's really positive that it's there. That point about inequalities again. So a lot of the stuff that you'll have seen reported during COVID, you'll have come up, like we all learned a new expression, COVID or COVID-19. A newish one for a lot of people was BAME and non-BAME. And people, as on the left here, I was listening to her on Radio 4 last night. She's got a show starting. She came here from Kenya and suddenly was grouped with Filipinos. It was the example she gave. Here's the whites and here's the rest of you kind of thing. That doesn't make a lot of sense epidemiologically. It doesn't make any sense in terms of social marketing, in terms of how you'd communicate with people about vaccine take-up. It doesn't link to any behavioural or attitudinal patterns which work along white, non-white. You need to look at this stuff in a lot more detail. So one of the OpenDataSavesLives sessions that we ran, and there's a screen grab there on the right, with Professor Richard Webber, was about using people's names. So using your first name and your second name to allocate your ethnicity at a level of accuracy beyond what we would have thought would be possible. And that's allowed us in the NHS to say diabetes is off the scale for Sikhs. And that links back to what we did back in the social marketing with Scott and Paul, where there was a cultural thing about being perceived to be physically big, have a big house, a big car, offer rich food to guests and so on. And we saw diabetes growing in that population hugely. And that hasn't gone away to some extent. There'll be little small pockets of success, but at an overall level, those types of patterns are still really important and not analysed as much as they should be. And that's something we want to pick up in OpenDataSavesLives. I've put this in as a reference just so you've got it, which is the new DataSavesLives report, which talks to all of this, and I hope starts to lay the ground for more sharing, better information governance. That's one of the big things that we're kind of pushing through OpenDataSavesLives. And with a minute to go, I'm just going to keep us on time there. So I've just put this in as a kind of placeholder really of something that we might come back to. So part of this afternoon's point is for you all to say, these are areas that we would like to concentrate on and do some more research on. This is the one I'm interested in. If you're interested in class and ethnicity and any sort of variation. This is what I'm going to be doing for the next 5 or 10 years. So just join in. Let's encourage public health to drop the index of multiple deprivation and start to use geodemographics more. We've got some amazing mapping work coming later from a guy called Ed from Integrated Digital, where you can start to plot the fact that some housing estates have been built in such a way that people are completely reliant on cars, and therefore you then get obesity, and you then get heart disease, and you then get diabetes, and so on. You've got planning decisions which just don't seem to take account of people's lifestyle. So it's
Marc, you're back on. So, this is a great way of chairing a meeting where I can just come on and stop rather than waving at you. So yeah, we've got 5 minutes before Chris Roebuck from NHS Digital joins us to talk about open data. Something is beeping. I don't know what it is. Whether you can. There we go. Stop. But I've got a question. So the determinants of health outcomes. It's easy when you say it quickly. Does class and economic background not come up as much as other protected characteristics in your assessment?
It tends to correlate with them all, and I'll get the numbers wrong, but people think if you want to improve the health and wellness of the population, you invest in the NHS. That will give you, I forget the number, 20 to 30% effect. If we had unlimited GP access, unlimited access to surgeons and physicians and so on. The bigger numbers, the bigger percentages are your environment, your housing, your domestic setup, your access to education, your access to clean air, and so on and so on. I'll turn my alerts off. That might be me. Sorry if that was me. I might have turned that beeping off. Thanks, Scott. So if you imagine, a lot of people are talking about linked data sets at the moment, and they go, well, what we need to do is link the GP data to the hospital data. And that's fine, and that will tell you some useful information. So you could take data from TPP and you can link it to the data from the hospital that I work in, and that will tell you that Paul is a repeat visitor to his GP about his diabetes, but it also spirals out of control and he comes into my emergency department quite a lot. So that's useful. It doesn't tell you anything attitudinally, behaviourally, lifestyle-y about Paul. It doesn't tell you how many steps he takes, or if he's just bought a new gravel bike, or if he drinks too much on a Saturday night, or if he still hasn't given up smoking, or lives by the side of a road which lorries drive down all day long, or lives in an area where the sun never shines, or hasn't got access to footpaths and open spaces, or can't see the sea, or can't see museums. I could carry on. So I think NHS data is fine, and that's what people like Chris Bates and John O'Connell are absolutely trying to help us out with. What we need to do is go that next step and bring in data. They were facetious examples, but only to a point, really. If I took your Sainsbury's bill, Paul, and had access to that and your data from your Garmin, and put that next to your, your Libra patch data and your record of visits to the hospital and so on. We need to do that carefully, and we need, because that's sensitive data. And you might say, well, I don't want to tell my GP that I've got an alcohol problem. And there's a role for aggregate data. People like Paul respond to these types of incentives. And if you present it at an aggregate level, I think it's fine to implement. The GP conversation, the conversation about your reliance on whiskey is a sensitive conversation between you and your GP and maybe a voluntary group. It's not about sharing that data with someone. I don't care if you drink whiskey or not, kind of thing. I'm interested in if people like you and I tend to drink more whiskey and therefore tend to be more at risk of heart disease and other illnesses, so that I can adjust my behaviour. What's interesting?
So I'm going to jump in. So obviously this is probably something we're going to talk about more. But Diana, professor in Hertfordshire, I think that she's the question in the chat, which is should should studies on deprivation be rejected on ethical grounds? So it sounds like people have been trying to this, and we need to share more success stories so it is included in, and it's not just knocked out at the governance and ethics committee lines. Is that something that chimes with you, Marc?
Yeah, it does, and I we take a deliberately. My starts my premise that if we link data together, good things will happen from it. As soon as you start to use it for nefarious purposes, then everything has to close right down. I think what happens with a lot of those IG committees is that they hear the sound of data being linked together, and they kind of shut their ears immediately. But my experience is people who are physicians or academics or patient groups. I was talking to a parish council yesterday who said, "You never come and talk to us." Parish councils are an amazing resource for encouraging people to get fit. I think the problem I have with IG is that people take a stance before they hear the argument. And the conversation we might have later, when we spoke to Med Confidential and others, who people would think were naturally overly cautious about sharing, it was like a light bulb moment for me, because they were totally up for appropriate use of data. And I think we've got to get past that, people thinking, oh, and I've sat in committees with people.
And it's more of a risk to say, so we need to share. So it means it's why wouldn't we do this? And here's it because others are doing it and you're falling behind. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And there are GDPR principles which say there is a risk of not sharing data. That's the thing we need to remember. Principle 7, there's a risk if you don't share data.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good point to finish on. So thanks very much, Marc. I'm going to give you a round of applause here. So a bit of clapping. And then next up, I'm really excited about this, is we've got Chris Roebuck from NHS D and X, I think it is, who's going to talk about the task and finish group and some outputs that the NHS are going to do around open data. So this is actual things happening around open data with the NHS. So Chris has got a pre-record. Please listen and ask any questions on the Q&A or in the chat, and then we'll pick up with Chris once he's finished. And I will hide myself now.
Hello, my name's Chris Roebuck. I'm the Chief Statistician at Nhs Digital, and it's great to be speaking at this OpenDataSavesLives, the Unconference. I'm really pleased to be here to tell you about a group of national organisations involved in health and care data, who between us hold most of the health and care data sets nationally, who've got together to coordinate and improve our open data efforts. We've started this collaboration very recently. We've met for the first time in July, so it's still very early days. So what I'm keen to do is tell you a bit about why we've got together, some of the things we're looking to achieve, and some of the feedback we've had so far, as well as hopefully giving you an opportunity to give your feedback around priorities. So we all acknowledge that open data in health and care are so important, as the Unconference title suggests, ultimately to save lives. And this can be done in a number of ways, through enabling expert users to do analysis of the data sets that can inform national policy, national decision making, find trends, patterns in the data that are really important for that. Also, similarly at a local level, patterns, organisations that seem to be doing well, getting particularly good outcomes, understand what they're doing differently from organisations that aren't doing so well, and use that to improve local decision making. And finally, as the pandemic has shown really powerfully, putting data into the hands of citizens as well, so they can make their own decisions. And this has been nowhere more apparent than in the COVID dashboards on gov.uk produced by Public Health England that show local areas, patterns of infection in those areas to enable those decisions. So the organisations involved in this group, there's Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England and Improvement, NHSX, NHS Business Services Authority, UK Health Security Agency, along with Public Health Scotland, and there's been some fantastic work going on in Scotland that we're in England are very keen to learn from, and the Leeds Open Data Institute. As I've said, we first met in July this year, and we're really looking to do 2 or 3 things. One is look at where we can improve collectively and individually, and often this isn't about reinventing wheels, it's around learning from either the user feedback and research we've collected, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute, or learning from what's being done really well in particular organisations or in particular areas, and we've all got stuff to show and highlight, and how we can engender that collectively. So as I mentioned, the COVID dashboards have been a really good example. COVID's also driven lots of other open data sets. We in Nhs Digital now routinely open up our 111 pathways data. We also open up our e-referrals data set, the NHS Business Services Authority, using a tool called CCAN, putting their data out in a very structured way now, together with the descriptive information, and NHS Scotland, Public Health Scotland have done a huge amount of work around building a really structured open data offering, and other organisations also doing lots of good individual bits of work, and I won't list them all now, but plenty to learn from and reflect on. So what we as a group are looking to do, as I say, there's several important areas. One piece that has come through very loudly and clearly in all of the user research that we've undertaken is around consistency and predictability of our products. So having files formatted in the same way, clear metadata, clear accompanying information around quality, and all machine readable and easily findable. So the huge army of people who are using the data for the public good aren't spending their collective time tidying up their data, trying to find individual data sets, trying to track them down and each come up with their understanding of the quality of the information, but all of that is provided already by the central bodies, so you can then spend your time analysing the data, doing useful things with the data, ultimately for the benefit of patients and citizens. So that's probably one of the clearest messages, and there's a lot we can start to do as a group around how we standardise our approaches. Trust and transparency is also a very big theme, and that's obviously open data being transparent, but also being very clear. These aren't data that can identify people, these are fully anonymous data, and there's been strong processes applied to ensure that that is the case. There's different routes for people who want potentially identifiable data for the benefits of health and care, but a process needs to go through to ensure the security of those data, and there's various data access processes, but this is all around anonymous data. So the beauty of these data are that they can be made available to anyone. Anyone can access them and use them without the risk of identifying people. Another big theme is around building the community, and that's why I'm so delighted to present at this event. We've all done our bits of user research that we're pooling as part of this group, but keeping that community going so people can feed in so yourselves can feed in your priorities, can ask questions of us, raise challenge of us, and we're communicating in the open what we're doing plans for future data sets for feedback, information around the quality of the data sources, and things are predictable, and our developments are in line with your needs. That full feedback loop, really important theme. And then also adaptability of the service. So while I said in terms of what's coming out and when, the formats of stuff, quality information, that's all very predictable, should all be very predictable. We as users need to respond to new demands, COVID being an example of one that's occurred recently, but I'm sure there'll be other ones, and adapting. So central to that is getting the feedback and then responding and building on what has been done with COVID for other areas, non-COVID related areas. So I hope that's given you a flavour of what we're looking to do as a group. And as I say, it's early days. We met for the first time in July. We're still prioritising our work programme, and we'll keep users updated as we do that. And also really keen to get your input as we go along. My email address is chris.roebuck@nhs.net. That's chris.roebuck, ROEBUCK. I'm very keen to get your feedback around any of this, or thoughts as to how we can improve our open data offer.
So I'm really happy about that, because I was part of the task and finish group, and encouraged Chris and the team to have an output on something that was open about the open data task and finish group. So hopefully we're also going to see some blog posts and technical reviews, and be open in the process, not just the data. So we're going to invite Chris to join me on stage now. If you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A or in the messages. And I've got a couple of prepared questions that hopefully will catch up with people. Hi, Chris.
Hi there, Paul. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Yeah, great stuff. And thanks very much for your talk, and no slides, which is good. So it's a conversation. I've got a couple of questions. So if I was the three parts to the first one. So if I was someone from the NHS, what would I start to see happen differently around data? If I was a company or an organisation who uses data, what would I start to see differently? And if I was a patient customer of the NHS, what would I start to see different? So I guess, what would you start to see differently from those three, I'm not going to call them user needs, but three types of people who interact with the NHS?
Yeah, sure, Paul. And the first thing to say is we publish loads of data. We in NHSD have about 300 stats publications a year. The other national bodies, similar numbers. So there's no shortage of data out there. I think the areas we're going to look at in particular as a group, we're going to look at how we can improve the metadata. We're starting off with a couple of pilots. Kate's going to say a bit more about mental health in a bit. Also working with Business Services Authority. So there's much greater consistency. There's this anecdotal example around the specialty field having had 17 different names or ways it's described. So that clear consistency, which I think ultimately for people in the NHS, people are using our data, that's the kind of bedrock on which they build other stuff. They can move between data sets. Also, discoverability, people, and looking particularly, I suppose, at members of the public or people less well versed in using the data. They're not bothered about which particular organisation is producing the data. They just want to know they can find data on a particular topic. So that's another big area of focus that we're doing as a group. We're looking at specific tools, but more than that, it's around putting stuff in the open, in consistent ways that are easily searchable in common search engines, which is how they can find their data. And then the third example around industry, Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, so the final area we're looking at is around standards, and there's been quite a bit of work done in individual organisations based around how we best pull that together so we're consistent unless there's a very good reason not to be consistent. So there's that predictability and all the user research that's been done. Predictability is a really key theme that came through. People know what to expect when it comes out in the same format. So the experts in industry aren't spending their time manipulating the data, cleaning the data up. They're spending the time doing all the exciting value-added work around them.
Fantastic. And they all sound... it's quite exciting to be around that. And the other part of it is that the pace that we're starting to work is of a different pace than I've experienced when working with the NHS. So that's I think something that from my perspective, I think people will start to see that there is a significant pace around this, and it's now in a why wouldn't we do this, but rather than why should we, which is it's a great thing to see. There's a couple of related questions or points that Marc has made in there. Is that could NHS Digital come out more strongly to help people link NHS and social care data, and then also around how could people share their own, say, fitness data with trusted organisations. So there's a bit about health and social care, and then individuals sharing data about themselves.
Yeah, sure. So two really important areas, and so social care in some ways has been the forgotten service in terms of high quality, granular national data. So whereas in secondary care, HES has been used for years and years and is part of the bedrock of national and local decision making, social care data typically have been collected at aggregate level centrally, so can generate some insights. But what we really need to do is start getting client level social care data with appropriate governance around them, so those data can then be linked up. There's been some pilot projects done on this locally, particularly in the northwest. It's something I'm really keen that we start to up the pace on and start to do more centrally around it. And it isn't an easy thing to do. There's thousands of different providers of different types of social care. There aren't necessarily standard ways the data are held or stored locally. So it's got to be, we've got to be able to accept data in their diversity in order to do that. And we are starting to look at that in more depth, starting to discuss it with a number of other organisations. It won't be an overnight thing, but it's so important for understanding what's going on. So some really good groundwork is starting to be laid. And if people are particularly interested in this area, please contact me afterwards, and I'll point them to more specific details around the projects that are underway on it.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. A round of applause to you, and we're gonna move on to the next one, which is another part of your team who have been working with us around publishing data relating to mental health, the start of a project. So, thanks very much, Chris. A great talk, and we're going to now move on. So, I think you're going to get removed from the stage. There we go. And now we're over to Kate Croft and Paul Jennings from NHS Digital about an introduction to their
Welcome everyone to this session where we're going to introduce NHS Digital's mental health data, including how to access our open data and interpret that data. I'm Kate Croft and I head up a team of analysts working on mental health and community data at NHS Digital. And this is Paul.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Jennings. I'm an analytical section head working with our psychological therapies data.
So in this session, I'm going to introduce NHS Digital and our data services before moving on to looking at our mental health data sources. Paul will then demonstrate how you can find our aggregated open data and the supporting information that will help you use it. This will be particularly focused on our two of our main mental health data sets, which we collect at record level and then make publicly available after adding useful measures and applying disclosure control methodology. We're really interested in your views and questions, so please comment in the chat as we go through, and we'll review all your feedback after the event. If you want to make any comments after the session, please do, and you can do that through our mailbox, which is mh.analysis@nhs.net. First of all, we want to ask you a question. If you could let us know who you are through the chat. If you start your response with A1 and give us your name, your role and your organisation. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Nhs Digitals to start with, and our job is to use data and technology to help improve health and social care services. We do that through a number of key functions. These include managing more than 100 active IT services for the NHS and care system. These are vital to the everyday work of almost all clinicians and other professionals in the NHS. For example, NHS Mail, through which 10 million emails are sent every day. We also design and build and procure new digital services and systems. This means that we're often your first point of contact with the NHS. For example, we've developed the NHS app, which has become really popular recently, and we now have more than 10 million users of that service. We also collect, process and link data for the health and care system. We develop a number of IT and data standards. They include standards around information governance, so that data is health and social care data is securely used. And we are also the cybersecurity partner to the health and care system, which help local organisations keep their systems secure. In terms of the data we use a number of different mechanisms to collect data from a variety of health and social care organisations, including NHS trusts, local authorities and independent sector organisations. This includes data collection through our national record level data sets, our data collections, our clinical audits, and we conduct a number of different surveys to find out more detailed information. This gives us a wide range of both record level and aggregated data about activity, outcomes and people's experience. This all helps us inform policy and monitor improved care. In terms of all of that data we make publicly available. So we firstly process and sometimes link the data, and we make that available through our website, through our official statistic publications. For some key data sets, we produce interactive data dashboards. Where we have answered individual requests for data, we make some of that data available through our supplementary information page or through our Freedom of Information page. In order to help all users, including yourselves, make better use and more intelligent use of data, we do a lot of analysis on data quality, and we make that information available as well. And then if the publicly available data does not suit individuals' needs, we have a data access request service where clinicians, researchers and commissioners can request aggregate record level data in order to do their own analysis to help improve health and social care. In terms of our mental health data, we have a number of different sources. That includes our record level data sets, which are the mental health services data set, improving access to psychological therapies, and our assuring transformation data sets. We have a couple of surveys we do, one on children and young people and another on adult psychiatric morbidity survey, which look at the prevalence of psychological disorders. And then we have another couple of data sets which contain some mental health data. For example, the Quality and Outcomes Framework includes data around depression at GP practice, and our NHS workforce statistics have information about the mental health workforce. We've now got a couple of further questions for you. The first one of those, if you could start with A2, is how familiar are you with Nhs Digitals mental health data already? And then if you do already use it, if you could let us know how you use that data. So I'm going to move on to Paul now, who's going to talk through our mental health data in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Kate. So I'll begin with the Mental Health Data Hub. So the Mental Health Data Hub is a great place for you to explore interactively all of our various mental health data in one place. So if you access the Mental Health Data Hub landing page through the URL that I'm sharing on the screen now, you will be able to find links to all of our topic-based analyses covering various elements of the data sets that Kate has described already. Nhs Digitals publications are easy to reach through our homepage using the search bar. You can simply type the topic of interest into the search. For our official statistics, select the monthly statistics result, which should appear first in the search results. Clicking on this will take you to a landing page for our statistical series, giving you links to the most recently released data as well as past iterations. Similarly, you can find our Iaf Publications by typing Iaf into the search bar. This will take you to another landing page, laid out in exactly the same way. Our data publishes government official statistics in a series that is updated monthly. When you view one of our monthly publications, you'll see a screen like this. Our reports are made up of a summary letting you know what the publication is about and any pertinent information related to that reporting period, a set of key facts for the casual user. So here you can see the recovery rate, which I'll reference through this talk. We also release interactive visualizations of our data, which I'll delve into shortly. And we release data in a comma-separated value CSV format to enable reuse of our aggregated data. You'll also find links to subpages that cover more detail about a range of data in the publication. So for example, the Iaf releases include sections on activity, waiting time, and outcomes. Our interactive dashboards are a great way to easily access our data and compare services. For example, the psychological therapies dashboard goes into a great level of detail, covering amongst other things patient outcomes. You can view outcomes at national, commissioner and service provider levels. You can even use the drop-down menus to compare providers and commissioners, turning data into insight. Our mental health statistics each have a front page so users can access the data and supporting contextual information in one place. Our Iaf front page is accessible through the URL digital.nhs.uk/Iaf reports. This will take you to a page containing links to all of our publications, past and present. You'll also find links to supporting documents such as metadata, user guidance, and data quality summaries. You'll find summaries of changes to the methodology used in our statistics over time, and other useful information such as the dataset specification, as well as links to external policy and program reference material. When you open one of our CSV data files, it looks like this. The structure is static, meaning that you can easily set up your data ingest processes to make use of the data. It's easy to query the data directly by applying a filter through Excel's filtering tool. There are columns for the reporting period start and end dates, the geographic level, We usually present data at national commissioner and service provider levels, although some of our data will include other breakdowns. We also have organisation codes and names for reference. Each measure is listed on a separate row, and each has a unique reference number, helping you use this in tandem with the metadata to understand all of our published measures. And I'll talk about the metadata shortly. The final column shows the statistics themselves. Our publications adhere to data disclosure rules designed to protect patient confidentiality. You can apply filters to easily navigate to the data that you're interested in. So for example here, I'll just filter the data by England level and then look for the count of new referrals to Iaf services. And there we are. So each of our statistics series has an accompanying metadata file that explains how the measures are being calculated from the source data. For the mental health services statistics, you'll find a link to the metadata at the bottom of each release, as you can see here. For the Iaf statistics, you'll find a link to the metadata on the publication front page. Which you can see here. When you open the metadata file, you'll find it laid out like this. Each row corresponds to a published measure exactly as it appears in the statistics. So for example, here is the count of new referrals received to Iaf services. So each measure has a reference number and a plain English description of what the measure means. There's technical information about the source data used in the statistics, as well as any derived fields. And finally, the construction column tells you how the measure is built. The constructions are written in pseudocode so that they are querying language agnostic. Using the count of new referrals as an example, you can see here that we are simply counting the referral.pathway ID where the referral received date was in the reporting period, and with an additional clause to further limit the data. The additional clause here relies on a derived dataset field, and you can use the derivation reference column to find this in the dataset specification. So we're just going to finish with a couple of final questions. Now that we've shown you the mental health statistics that we release and the data sources, is there anything that you want NHS Digital to do differently with our mental health open data? So please start your response with A4. And finally, question 5 is, will you do anything differently as a result of today's session? So please start your response to that question with A5.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And
thanks very much, everyone. Before we start, we're just going to ask, I think what we're going to do is we're going to not have the Q&A. We're about 10 minutes behind schedule. And I think we were getting questions in the chat, with people answering the questions in the chat. What I think I would like to do is do a separate session on this. So maybe do some surveys and do a deeper dive on this, and use this session and the chat to springboard into another piece of work, because the way the data is being used in mental health is applicable to other data sets that are being used and how people use it. So I think there's a whole load of commonalities that we can bring out, and OpenDataSavesLives is perfect for doing that right. So we're now going to move on to the next session, which is about the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, which I'm sure we're all interested in, and keeping ourselves going longer. So what we'll do is we'll pick up with the NHS Digital team and work up a separate session so that they can get some of those questions answered quickly, and then turn it into maybe a separate OpenDataSavesLives session. So thanks very much for that, everyone. And now we've got Tina Woods talking about longevity. Let's look at that.
Hi everyone. I'm really pleased to be involved in the ODI OpenDataSavesLives Unconference to talk about the work that I'm doing with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, and especially, and the focus of today is the Open Life Data Framework. So I'm Tina Woods, I wear a few hats and work in both public and private sectors and have an interest in system change to move towards a more preventative health model, engaging citizens more widely, but also working with healthcare professionals, businesses, policymakers, etc., really to incentivize and promote sustainable health and well-being for all. So just a few words on how this all came to be in terms of the Open Life Data Framework. So I am the director of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity and also head up a new venture called Business for Health, consultation all around public health by business and businesses and employers, and really looking at the role of business in terms of maximizing health, but also reducing harm, taking a leaf from the climate change experience to bring health into ESG mandates, kind of like an ESHG framework rather than just an ESG framework, to incentivize investment into long-term sustainable health and care and transformation. So this has a huge link and a parallel with the Open Life Data Framework. And both these initiatives came out of the work that we did with the All-Party Parliamentary Group a couple of years ago, starting with Health of the Nation, which began to really look at how to achieve this mission, which you see at the top of the slide, 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health inequalities. This was a goal that was set in 2017 to string together the objectives of the 4 grand challenges of the industrial strategy, which was AI and data, clean energy, mobility, and the aging society. And so the Health of the Nation was published right before COVID, actually, in February 2020. And 2 of the recommendations, the Business for Health venture that I mentioned, and also the Open Life Data Framework, came out of that and were referenced again in Leveling Up Health, which we published in April this year in 2021, right after coming out of the pandemic, and got a whole lot of support from our then Secretary of State for Health and Care, Chris Whitty, our current our CMO, and also Henry Dimbleby, who has just literally released the National Food Strategy, because food is actually one of the big areas that really needs attention in terms of leveling up health and dealing with the obesity epidemic, for example, and the food systems shaping that really is becoming a huge priority. And you can see on this slide also, the Open Life Data Framework was actually published in the Lancet on the eve of the Leveling Up Health report, and really pulls together the context and the rationale for why we're doing this. So why are we doing this? So the key purpose of this whole project of the Open Life Data Framework is really around, and we've got that on the slide, to make it easier to connect data across our lives to help understand how we can keep healthier for longer and reduce health inequalities. And who's involved in this? So the working group comprises about 45 experts who've been meeting together since last year. Actually, we informed and pulled together some of our recommendations for the national data strategy that closed its consultation December 2020. And the group is chaired by Lord James O'Shaughnessy, who's the former Undersecretary of Health and also visiting professor at Imperial College, and is directed by myself and Gavin Starks, who many of you will know. He's the former CEO of ODI and also was one of the co-architects of open banking and very involved in other areas like open energy, open finance, open pensions, etc. So we've actually received funding for this work from the Health Foundation and are currently working with a number of groups like the National Data Guardian, Ada Lovelace Institute, NHSX, Genomics England Turing Institute, and a number of other individuals in these organizations, and increasingly involving other stakeholders. And speaking at the moment, as part of our consultation that is running at the moment, it will have closed by the day of the ODI Unconference. But we're involved in groups like the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, UKRI, our Future Health, BAYS, so many groups are involved in this process. And so essentially we're looking at what we can take from other sectors like open banking and the open standard to harness data-intensive technologies and data to extend and make more equal the healthy longevity of British citizens over their life course. So what are our key goals? So our key goals are reflected on this slide. And so very, very briefly, we're trying to make better use of data and data-enabled technologies. We're trying to propose solutions for innovating and scaling up in the public sector, but leveraging data sets across and outside the sector. Really looking at the digital health infrastructure to enable innovation that is more fairly distributed and resilient. And most importantly, is to build public trust, which is the key thing in all of this. So what we're trying to do in this is to really focus on the 80% because of what actually keeps us healthy and well. Most of the determinants of our health are actually outside the health and care system, although many of us still think that healthcare belongs to the NHS. And actually, really what we're saying is that to be able to achieve our mission, which is 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health inequalities, you really have to look outside and look at, for example, that image that the Health Foundation has put forward is good health actually involves, so many other things like where you live, the food that you're eating, the environment that you live, housing, your socioeconomic status. These are all really, really important factors for our health. And this is what we're really focused on. So we talk about in the work that we're doing with the Open Life Data Framework is health relevant data. So that's data that's outside our NHS and care system. And this speaks to the whole concept of the exposome, which are, and you'll see in the slide here, the tree of life and the environmental exposures that we're all sort of affected by, like diet, housing, air quality, physical activity, which is obviously we have a choice over, but there are other areas like our built environment, our finances that are a bit less, which are less in our control. And this is where policymakers and government have a huge role to play. And the Open Life Data Framework that we're looking at is really looking at how we can harness, through an enabling data infrastructure and with the right governance mechanisms to harness data sets in both public and private sectors across the life course to develop personal population and pandemic resilience, linked to the 5 priorities of the report that I mentioned earlier, the Leveling Up Health report, which is very, very focused on, in the short to medium term, on obesity management, which I'm sure many of you will have seen has been quite visible, and obviously Boris Johnson having himself come quite close to death, actually. I mean, he puts it down to being overweight, clean food, healthy children, clean air and smoking. So those are really, really big priorities that we're looking at in the context of the Open Life Framework. And you'll see that reflected in the use cases that we focus the initial sort of work on, recognizing that actually to really understand how to create an enabling environment, you really have to look at the use cases to really start to unpick the barriers that otherwise prevent data sharing. So the 3 use cases that we've selected, one of which some of you will recognize Red Book for Life. If you've got kids, you'll get a Red Book, which gives you sort of access to vaccination status, etc. But actually, what we're proposing is to create a digital Red Book for Life, across your lives, which we can revisit at key points throughout our life, and then and we're looking very specifically at weight management in this case. We're also looking at a healthy aging and longevity data exchange, really looking at the value exchange between all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, which includes citizens, but also investors and, of course, healthcare professionals and the business community. And very specifically, we're looking at supermarket basket data to look at how we can incentivize healthier eating. Civic data cooperatives is really interesting. We're working with Ian Buchan and Gary Leeming up in Liverpool, and they've been really, really busy with the CIFA program, looking at harnessing data from a local public health perspective and working with anchor institutions and harnessing civic action to develop a much more rapid response to health needs on the ground. So really, really interesting use cases that have really helped us sort of unpick some of the things that we need to in this Open Life Data Framework. And really what we're saying is we're building on what some of you may have seen in the press, actually, a couple of months ago, that the NHS and Department of Health, they published the DataSavesLives data strategy. And so what we're doing with the Open Life Data Framework is building on this and recognizing the value of data that sits outside the health and care system, the so-called health relevant data that I spoke to earlier, to enhance individual and population health and reduce health inequalities. And it speaks to the need that is being asked at the moment, as they're sort of going into the next phase of the National Data Strategy for Health, is the need for standardized integration of health relevant data, particularly at the level of the ICS, the Integrated Care System, which some of you may have heard about, which is really looking at place-based approaches to address our health, but also to address health inequalities. And what we're really saying is we want to support the flow of data across the system to support interoperability and develop standards that are open, that are accessible, that are usable, and which will fundamentally will promote frictionless data sharing and interoperability across silos. So what we've also done, and the way that we're approaching this with the Open Life Data Framework, is saying, listen, there's going to be a lot of questions. And I think one of, with what we're trying to do, and actually how does this interconnect with all the other initiatives that are taking place, both within the NHS and care setting, but also outside in other government departments, and of course linked to, and many of you attending the conference will be involved in sort of data in other sectors. And so what we're doing as part of the consultation process before we publish in October is looking at all the questions that are being asked about why we're doing this and what benefits it will bring to all the different stakeholder groups involved. So I'll just speak to a couple of the questions that have been asked. And these include, for example, and one of the big questions is around the language and the terminology. So a lot of people will ask, well, what is open data and what does open life mean? And I think and just from having been involved in quite a few conferences, and I'm sure this will be a big discussion point in the Unconference audiences as well, is what do we actually mean by open data? So this slide here comes from Gavin Starks at DGen, and reflects some of the very, very good work also that the ODI with their data spectrum slide that they share quite widely, which basically speaks to how data exists on a spectrum of accessibility from closed to shared and open. And obviously data can be accessed by an open API, which may be closed, shared, or open data. What we're also saying is that, you know what, we're not saying that, for example, electronic medical records or health records should be accessible by everyone. Because a lot of people, they think when we talk about, open health, they think, oh gosh, do you mean that my medical records will be available to everybody? Well, no, we are, of course, not talking about that's personal data. And of course, there's a lot of data outside of personal health data that is incredibly useful. And of course, also speaks to the health relevant data that I mentioned earlier. So really what we're talking about is taking examples from other sectors and looking at open standards, reusable agreements that make it easier for us to publish, access, share, and use data. And also, that define access to the different kinds of data, whether it's open, shared, or closed. So we get a lot of questions about privacy. And of course, many of you will have seen some of the backlash in the press actually that happened with the so-called GPDPR proposal. In the press, they were talking about it as the GP data grab, and that our data would be sold for profit to drug companies, and all the sort of the hysteria that happened around all of this during the summer after the DataSavesLives strategy that was published. And of course, we have to be very, very mindful, of course, our privacy and of course our confidentiality and consent must absolutely be observed and protected. And of course, this is not what we're talking about. But I think we're very well protected about, if there are data breaches, and this is which is covered very well by GDPR, there are already established processes for addressing them. And of course, data has been collected by NHS and Nhs Digital in particular as the guardian, for a very long time in a very trustworthy way. And they collect coded data, and it does not actually include free text data, which would include, for example, your address, for example. And also, the detail is always, the devil is always in the detail. And of course, the DataSavesLives strategy is very, very clear and very positive in terms of its intent. But I think they will say, and of course you will see this, that the government is very clear that this data will not be sold. And of course, re-identifying data, which has been a massive sort of concern, is also illegal. And some of the words that you might be finding and hearing about are words like the trusted research environments, which are very, very well established, for example, by UK Biobank and indeed the ONS and for example, HDR, Health Data Research UK. These are all, and you may have heard also with Ben Goldacre's group, Open Safely. These are all, and there's a huge move towards using those trusted research environments, which of course is also, which helps reassure people about privacy concerns as well. So another big question, and these are just some of the examples of what's in our frequently asked questions document that we've been building up, over the time that we've been running the consultation for the Open Live Data Framework. What's in it for society? And there's so many benefits of actually sharing our data. We hear a lot about the risks, but what we want to do is to engage people much more closely in their health by being much closer to the data. In fact, in the DataSavesLives strategy, it speaks to getting citizens closer to the data. And some of you will know about a number of really interesting projects, like, for example, in Manchester, the Solid project up in Manchester, personal data stores, for example. These all speak to looking at different models where citizens have control over their data. And of course, in countries like Estonia, they have a whole mechanism through their eCitizen program, where citizens are very, very close to data that they choose to share with whoever they choose in public and private sectors. And of course, with the pandemic here in the UK, the digital innovation has absolutely sort of boomed, and we have almost 2 million people now using the NHS app to access services. And of course, many of us are already using it to download our COVID vaccination sort of certificate so we can actually travel. So these all sort of speak to how I think the people are becoming more used to actually using their phones and using these apps and getting closer to their health, which will help to really expedite and accelerate the behavioral and cultural change, which is actually the most difficult one, to get people more engaged in a way that we are in other parts of our lives. So why shouldn't we be in the health context? So what's in it for the public sector? So obviously the DataSavesLives strategy has spoken a lot to that, but we want to, if we're going to reduce demand on our NHS and care system and keep healthier, and of course the big lesson from COVID is that we were more badly affected than all other European countries because we were basically in poor health, and we need to address that. So of course, fundamentally, this is about creating an environment where we can really start to look at how do we keep ourselves healthy and well through a sort of a cross government approach, helping the new Office for Health Promotion, focusing more on effective preventative health strategies, and complementing other moves underway. For example, some of you may have heard that the ONS is building a health index, which is looking at health more from an asset-based perspective, from the perspective of healthy people, but also the lives that we lead, but also the healthy places. And of course, that links very, very closely to some of the initiatives in terms of leveling up. And of course, we're saying we need to level up health and really close the gap in terms of healthy life expectancy, between the poorest and our richest citizens. And of course, we also want to support the development and implementation of the integrated care systems, which is a big focus at the moment in the NHS and care system. So what's in it for the private sector and taking this multi-stakeholder approach? Well, we want business to play a much bigger role in population health and to help us to identify and share private sector data that matters most to keep us healthy. For example, in workforce health, the private sector has access to data that will help us understand what is putting people at risk for musculoskeletal conditions and, of course, mental health. So these are big areas where the private sector have a huge role to play in terms of reducing demand on our NHS and care system through really good workforce health and well-being programs. And this includes also, for example, the NHS is one of the biggest employers in the world, in terms of workforce health. We also want to catalyze, and augment collaboration between the public and private sectors and bring down the walls that otherwise prevent sharing data in the interest of and really looking at harnessing data for the public good, addressing the needs and interests of taxpayers, government, and businesses, and of course, citizens just generally. We also want to unlock the ability to connect data sets for innovation and kind of taking a leaf from what happened in the fintech space with data portability and driven by regulation, where banks had to open up, and this is where the open banking standard came in. It started to really catalyze the fintech ecosystem and developed a huge raft of different products and services that consumers wanted to use. And we want to see the same thing happen in the context of health and to really support our startup sector. We hear about building back better and supporting, the tech sector, but this is, and we hope that the Open Live Data Framework will really help to release that innovation, because at the moment, startups find it really, really difficult to access and scale up in the NHS. So really fundamentally, and I'm this is the close of my presentation, trust is at the center of everything. So we really need to bring out, and this is the fundamental question that we're addressing in the Open Live Data Framework, is how can we protect trust, build trust, and make sure that we don't damage trust, because that really is the bedrock of everything. And I'll just say the National Data Guardian, who we've been working with, I mean, they have done quite some very, very interesting work with citizens' juries, and recently published Putting Good into Practice, a public dialogue on using health and care data. And their key findings were that actually, if you're looking at improved health outcomes, reducing health inequalities, and promoting independent living, the public are on board with that. And of course, we'll certainly share their data to achieve these sort of so-called public benefits. But they'll also be very happy to share data for other uses, as long as it brings benefit to wider society, and obviously in addition to themselves. And more recently, we've had other reports. The NIHR produced a report, and of course, the Ada Lovelace Institute are looking very closely at this. And I think, in the end, public, trust is at the center of everything, and remains a massive focus of all the work and the principles that will be enshrined in the Open Life Data Framework when we publish it in October. So that's the end of my presentation, and really I'm very, very grateful for your time, and hope very much that you will be on this journey with us as we kind of develop the Open Live Data Framework to benefit everyone, and to really sort of drive some of the system change that we really need to, so that we can make preventative health and care much more of a focus, and really drive the system change needed across all stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Tina, there's a round of applause here. So much in that presentation, wasn't there? So much to agree with, so much you pick up on the other talks, the work from lots of use cases there for Chris Roebuck and Nhs Digital, and also I don't think we even touched on the mental health piece, but also where we kicked off one about the unwarranted variation in health outcomes that we have across the UK. So I'm going to quickly invite Gavin Starks to join me on the stage, which I think will come, and then we're into the tea break. I've got a question for Gavin that I pinched for Marc, really, that I'll kick off with. And then if you've got any other questions, either put them in the chat or hit the Q&A. Here comes Gavin.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Hear you and we can see you. Fantastic.
Super.
Thanks, Gavin. There was so much in that presentation and lots that we could talk about, but we've only got a couple of minutes and we're sort of heading into people's cup of tea time. So yeah. I'll kick off. And I'll nick a question that we started off with, which is some of the major indicators of health inequality are around social class and where you were born and who your parents were, and it's not the other indicators of characteristics are relevant, but so how is the longevity project looking at that as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things here, and this was covered a little bit in the chat as Tina was presenting as well, is one of the things that I found most useful in trying to drive through this kind of work is to pick use cases that are of direct relevance to people. There's a lot of, I think, over the years, if not decades, I've been part of a lot of different programs which have tried to address data sharing, but they stay at quite a sort of meta level, without really getting into the weeds of what about this particular use case? What are the potential benefits? What are the potential harms? How do we deal with disenfranchisement from different groups in the process? And so the narrower the use case we can pick in the mix here, the more we can address those really specific questions around that use case, and then look at that and say, well, look, what are the rules or the processes that can be generalized from those use cases? So you've got to kind of do the big picture thing and then zoom right into a particular use case and then zoom back out again and say, like, did we learn something here? And I think that process of continuously zooming in and zooming out, it's kind of what we do as startups, but that sort of startup behavior, if you like, of rapidly doing that as well and saying, like, can we test it? Is really important.
Great. So I'm going to, we're now pitching to Chris Roebuck of Nhs Digital that what we're going to do is take the mental health data that was there, we're going to test it with beautiful information, use the longevity project and the overriding OpenDataSavesLives. We're all part of that now, right? So you've all joined, so we're all part of the OpenDataSavesLives initiative, and use that to test that live. And then once we've got a working prototype, Nhs Digital can then scale it. to make a bulletproof version of it. So
I think that's a really important point in creating demonstrators with an explicit view to scaling. And there's lots of demonstrator projects across, not just health, but across lots of different areas here where people build a demonstrator and they go, oh, well, that's very interesting, but it's not built to scale it up at the minute it's finished. Right? It's like, what where are the threats? Where are the harms? How can we put in place the processes that in most cases already exist to protect individuals, and how do we codify them around that use case?
Fantastic. So I think on the fly we're going to pitch a project to Chris Roebuck in a bit where Open Innovations, the Longevity Project, Icebreaker One, OpenDataSavesLives pitch a way of creating a real prototype for NHS Digital to take and scale across. And we might just pick up mental health data as a great place to start, because we've already doing a small piece of work on that, and that will help Kate and Paul Jennings, who were saying, can you give us some specific use cases about how we could publish better data about mental health? So watch out for that pitch coming your way in a bit, Chris. Are there any other questions apart from, obviously Gavin got the dark t-shirt memo this morning that we'd like to have with Gavin this morning? If not, I'm going to say that we could have a cup of tea. Gavin, you can direct message Gavin, obviously through this. Tina Woods' details are on the talk. We'll share that with everyone. Gavin's put the link on the net there.
Yeah, there's a piece of work we did a couple of years back now, or actually last year, for Bayes on their smart data strategy, and specifically looking at consent management and liability transfer, which sound very dry, but really at the heart of this is the how do we give and enable agency for whether it's individuals or whether it's organizations. There's a kind of framework here that's being moved forward by Bayes as part of their smart data initiative, and this will have its direct relevance to the national data strategy and so on. So there's kind of wavefront here of lots of different initiatives coming to bear at the same time, run through everyone from DCMS to Bayes and so on. So I think looking at trying to incorporate that thinking into these demonstrators with that view to scale was really powerful.
Fantastic. So it's now time for tea, and we're sort of getting back on track. So all you need to do is we'll close the stage. If you just join a table and talk to people, and then we'll call you back for the talks afterwards. If you want to talk about the mental health data and talk to Kate and Paul about their use cases, they're going to be on table one. Otherwise, just join a table, have a chat like you would at a normal conference, I guess, and sidle up to people and say hello. I'll see you in a minute. Thanks very much, Gavin.
Thank you.
I'm Ed Parham. I'm going to talk about how better understanding place can help improve health outcomes, and I'm going to talk particularly about how the environment enables activity. Originally, I'm an architect. I've been at Space Syntax for about 15 years, and Space Syntax is a spin-out from the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL. And what we do is we model the built environment and we analyse it to understand how it affects day-to-day outcomes. I also represent another company, Integrated Digital, and this is a Space Syntax spin-out, and it's a joint venture with two other companies. And we apply the technology developed in Space Syntax to domains which are outside of planning and design. Now, the start of this is to really think about place, and we have quite an intuitive understanding that space and place works across lots and lots of different scales all at the same time. I think the difficulty, though, has been how to measure and describe these individual scales in combination, but also the kind of siloed structures that we have around the disciplines and departments and the professions involved in these areas. And what that means is that the dark house in a dark street means that we have an architect who designs a room in a building, we have urban designers who talk about the way buildings interact with streets, we have planners looking at neighbourhoods, we have transport planners looking at the city, and all of these different professions and different groups do all of these things in a slightly different way. Now, what I'm going to show is a particularly focus on the bigger scales, how that can create the conditions that enable people to be active and to take a more strategic view. So it's less detailed within those disciplines and more cross-cutting strategic view of things. Now, the first thing that we do is start to think about cities as a set of systems, and we can think about those systems as being in families. So we can describe urban form as being a combination of street networks, land use, density, public realm, and green space. But there are other families as well around mobility, things like active travel, public travel, and also infrastructure, energy, waste, water networks, all of those sorts of things. Now, each of these systems, it has a job to do by itself, but it also needs to work in combination with everything else. And the really important thing is that it needs to work around the needs of people. To give an example of that, you could design a road network that makes it possible to drive across the city at 60 miles an hour, but it makes it impossible to walk to the shops to buy a pint of milk. And if this happens on one day, it's just inconvenient. But over time, if it happens every day, and people stop walking as much, it starts to have really profound impacts in terms of health outcomes. What Space Syntax have done is to develop a type of modelling that we call integrated urban model. And what this does is it starts to take the individual systems within urban form and mobility, and it can analyse each of them independently, but it can also start to see how they work in combination. So we can take the street network, combine it with pedestrian networks, cycle networks. We can link it to the land use, which is in every building in a city, and we can link all of those things together using a public transport network. Now, what we can then do is analyse from the point of view of every building in a city, what can I get to within a certain time if I travel on foot, by car, by bike, or by public transport. And we can extract from this model a series of different measures. Now, this one that has come up now, this is walkability, and what this is measuring is what is the mix of land uses you can get to within 15 minutes of every house or every building in a city. Red shows that you can get to more, blue shows you can get to less, and this is a combination not just of the land use, but the way the street network and the urban block sizes are all working together to make things closer together, to make it more convenient and easier to walk. This isn't looking at things like the quality of public realm or safety or any of those things, it's just talking about the big systems in a city. And in the last few years, we've started to see more and more examples of these sorts of stories coming out in the press. This is the BBC website a few years ago. People are really unhappy that they've just moved into these new houses, but because of the way that the layout has been designed, they spend the whole time in the car. It's only a few hundred metres from the centre of this town, but it's impossible to get there. They can't cross the dual carriageway because there's no direct connection into the town centre. They have to walk the long way around, so nobody does. There's more and more research coming out about travel behaviour and health outcomes. So British Medical Journal published a paper that shows reduced risk of obesity in people that take public and active travel. And there's more research that's starting to look at the secondary costs of this behaviour to society. Driving costs society, where walking and cycling actually generate benefits. Now, the really important part with all of this is that we've got the data and the models and the tools to be able to analyse existing cities and towns and see, do they put the conditions in place that mean that people will be car dependent or not? So we don't have to build something and then discover that they're car dependent when they've been living there. We can actually see this is likely to happen before it's built, and then we can change it to reduce that risk. We've applied these models in real world projects. We worked on the NHS Healthy New Town of Cranbrook down in Devon, and this was really interesting because it was a project that combined inputs from planning and public health and transport. And first of all, there was a really clear difference in what each of those departments considered an outcome. Planning and transport were talking about implementing a certain number of houses or a certain amount of transport network, whereas public health were talking about what the population living in this place would be like in 10 years' time. Would they be healthy and would they be happy? So to understand whether the master plan created those conditions, we needed to understand where did you get better health outcomes in Exeter. So we made this integrated model of Exeter, and we have walkability index shown here. The red is the more walkable bits, the blue is the less walkable parts. We gave this to the Public Health Department, and what they started to identify were a set of relationships between health outcomes and walkability. And the one that was really interesting was around obesity. They were finding higher levels of obesity in the less walkable parts of the city. When we make the models, we put it together in a way that we can combine it with demographic data. What this then means is that we can run other analysis on that demographic data. So what we have here is a model of Milton Keynes showing card dependence in blue, and we have combined that with Age UK's risk of social isolation in elderly people. So what you can then start to see is the darker blue areas are the place where you have a place risk. So these are the parts where you really need to have a car to get to the things. The dark grey is showing where you have a population who are more likely to be elderly and vulnerable. So this gives the city a way of identifying we have a place risk and a population risk, and then we can start to think about prioritising what to do about those areas, but also how to do that, because we can understand whether it's a physical condition, if it's the street network, if it's the land use, if it's the public transport. And that's the starting point, really, to think about interventions in a different way. It doesn't always have to be a physical change. Physical change is really difficult to make in a city. Sometimes it can be expensive, slow, really divisive. We can start to think about making a soft intervention, and that could be about a behaviour change campaign, but it could also be thinking about the way that you deliver services. And again, we've combined an integrated model of Greenwich here with some of the NHS open data sets. So we're looking at how many houses can access a GP, but we're then starting to say what's the capacity of that GP. If it has a bigger circle, it's a higher doctor to patient ratio. If the circle is pink, it means that the patients are recording a satisfaction rating of 75% or higher. So if you live in a light blue house in Greenwich, you can get to at least one good doctor. If you live in a dark blue house, you can get to at least two if you're walking. And so you can then start to see how do all these factors affect things, but you can then combine this again with the demographic or socioeconomic analysis and say, could we think about increasing capacity? Could we think about improving the quality of service in particular areas? Now the next step is really to be able to use these tools in practice to make a real difference. And the key point here is to be able to remove some of the technical barriers that make it possible for untrained people to really access the data and the insight that we get through these models. Then we've made a series of pilot tools that start to do this. And this is a web-based tool which is really allowing city planners in Sao Paulo to see how easy the city is to live in for elderly people and why that might be. So we can start to break that down to see, does the city make it possible for social interaction? How does it support physical activity every day? Has it got good access to healthcare? Have you got good access to public transport? But you can also start to be really precise about what's missing. Is it that you don't have access to, say, a park or cafes to meet people? We can also start to see how that picture changes as people become less mobile or lower income. And you can start to use this in a way to be able to see risk and to see what happens if our population becomes less mobile and lower income. Where are the high risk areas and what makes it like this? So in summary, we can use open, not always open, but a lot of the time you can use open data and tools to better understand where the environment creates risk and where this overlaps with vulnerable communities. We can use that understanding to shape physical interventions, so where to grow a city and how to grow it, if you are going to add a new bridge or a new connection to an existing city, or how to change the public realm. But we can also use it to make softer intervention. That could be about improving transport or providing on-demand transport solutions. It could be about targeting behaviour change interventions, or it could be about making improvements to the way that services are delivered. Thank you.
Ed, hopefully you're going to get an invite to join the stage, and we'll be talking in a minute. But this is the power of open, right? So I just beeped Ed a link to the work that ODLE's done about transport accessibility across North England, where we've worked out how quick it is to get from any point to any point in North England by public transport. So it's all open. So perhaps you might want to integrate that in your product next. Because that was a hard question that we know that needed answering.
I'm here, but for some reason my camera's not working. It's turned on, but it's just showing blank. I give it permission, but yeah.
Do you want to turn it off again a second?
Hang on. Let's try that.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Something's happening in where are you today, Ed? In geographically.
I'm in London. In
Very good. Right, fantastic. So I'm just going to go to the messages and people, and there we go. There. Close that. Go to the Q&A. So just my question for me is, it looks like a fantastic system, obviously making a massive difference and linked to lots of the conversations we've had this morning. How easy is it to integrate new pieces of data into your product, and could you add our transport accessibility data to your product?
Yeah, so the really short answer is that we've pre-processed the whole model of the country. And so what it does is that has, for every street and every property, it will have a whole series of attributes attached to it. So we make that big model link every property to the street network, public transport, land use, to all those queries. And so every property will have a certain set of measures already attached to it. When we put it together, it's also tagged with a whole load of other geographic boundaries. So you can aggregate it up to LSOA, MSOA, local authority level, CCG level, and it basically, what we found is really important, and this will link into the second question about the public transport access through MSOAs. What we found through looking at cities for the last 30 years or so is that it becomes really critical exactly which street you're on, and the particular characteristics can change. You can be on a high street, you can take a side turn, and it will feel completely different. And so being able to measure the difference street by street is really important. We always work at that smallest scale, and so we work at the small scale and then aggregate it up to connect to other data sets. In terms of the transport piece, we've run catchments from every single segment in the country. So I think the link that you sent me was showing it from the centre of MSOAs, and we've done our catchments from every single segment in the country. So from every street, junction to junction, we're looking at what can you get to if you go by public transport, move on foot, by car, by bike. It's multi-modal, and it's using time as the cost effectively.
Okay, so yeah, that's actually the one we built is actually uses the timetables for everything, so it should. Okay. So it's but it's great because it's open, right? So you can adapt and use and use it as we move forward. So I'm getting into data nerdery now. I'm getting maybe sideswiped about how I'm getting excited. So let me just check the chat. We don't have any specific questions that have come through, but one thing we were talking about at the coffee break was on behalf of everybody, we think we're going to invite the ONS to come and talk about the new works that they're publishing and the new data that they're publishing as well. So I think we're looking at an OpenDataSavesLives special on geographic representation of data and real-time, how we can all start to collectively build a commons around this, and then, like you, build products on top, but it can be used in lots of different contexts, so watch out for that. I'm just checking to make sure I haven't picked up any questions, but you're most welcome, Ed, and if we could just give Ed the traditional round of applause, please. That'll be, we're getting them, that's coming through. And of course, if you need to get in touch with Ed, this is all going to be live on the OpenDataSavesLives website. His contact details are we'll put them in the chat. And thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about my camera. It's got the light on to show it's working, but it's just not showing on the screen.
It wouldn't be the same if something didn't go quite to plan, would it?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't.
So next up, we've got Chris Bates. He's got a pre-record. He can't join us because he's had to for the Q&A, but Chris Bates is going to talk about the work that TPP have done with Ben Goldacre's team down in Oxford on Open Safely in the pandemic, which is fabulous work. And also is if you know health and you know the ecosystem within it, it's a big step for TPP to working in this way. So it's very exciting in terms of a organisational way of innovation and being open. So I'll lose myself, and Chris Bates will join us.
Hello, good morning. My name is Chris Bates. I'm the Research and Analytics Director at TPP, and we are an electronic health records and clinical systems provider based here in the UK. I'm going to talk to you about the Open Safely platform. This is something, a platform that myself and Ben Goldacre have been talking to the OpenDataSavesLives team on and off for the last 18 months. So I'm here to give you a bit of an update, but also a little bit of a history about the platform, the principles, some of the science we've been doing, and some of the policy implications that have come from the work. So firstly, and apologies for those of you who know some of this, but a little bit of history. So if we roll back to March 2020, when the pandemic was really taking hold here in the UK, we were asked to, in short, a question, which was, in the context of this global emergency, could we jointly create a highly secure, safe platform for EHR research on a massive scale across millions and millions of records, and could we do it very quickly? And this was a collaborative approach between TPP, software vendors, and also with the University of Oxford and the EBM Data Lab, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and working on behalf of the NHS. And trying to answer questions that came from the NHS were really important about the pandemic, but also were coming from the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor in the government. And the answer was yes. And in a 6-week period, we built the OpenSafely platform from a standing start to the point where we could do powerful analyses. So OpenSafely is a secure, transparent, open source software platform for the analysis of EHR data. It's deployed on top of electronic health record databases to create a trusted research environment. But one of the unique things is that it's built in the secure data center where the electronic health records provided by the vendor, in this case TPP, where those records are stored. So that's NHS accredited data centers. So instead of the data moving location and extracts going out to research teams, it stays where it is and all analysis takes place in situ. It means that the engineers and the epidemiologists inside the universities and inside the NHS work very closely with the EHR software developers who know the data extremely well, create a powerful team with a lot of complementary skills, but different engineering and analytics skills with very little redundancy, which allowed us to work very, very quickly. And on this slide here, you can see another of the key characteristics was to approach with different levels of data access. So we wanted to make sure that the research teams could access the full power of event level, high dimensional electronic health record data, but we wanted to mitigate against some of the risks that data can cause. So all data, and this is a standard approach many of us will know, is pseudonymized when we're wanting to provide research level extracts. So all identifiers, mobile phone numbers, names, addresses are all dropped. Any linkable identifiers, such as the NHS number, are hashed, so we can do that. So you have a database where most of those identifiers have gone, or all of them have gone. However, that still leaves you with a problem, and the problem is that a small combination of healthcare data items can identify people pretty quickly. If you know someone very well and you happen to be working with raw, de-identified data like that, you may be able to infer who that person is. If it's someone whose life is played out in the public, that's very much the same. So, for example, Ross Anderson in his Security Engineering Bible gives a fairly famous example that if you were to query all males born in 1953 on an EHR database and look for people who were treated for atrial fibrillation on October 19th, 2003, then you've probably found Tony Blair, because it's a small combination of items that identify that a small group of people, and all of that was published in the papers and still available online today. So it's important that we mitigate against that. And to do that, that means that the actual research teams only ever work with anonymized aggregate data. They can run queries on that high dimensional powerful data, but they can only they don't ever see any raw patient data when they're doing this analysis. They can't manipulate that, they can't see it. They work at arm's length from that using the OpenSafely services that have been developed. So what are some of the core principles around OpenSafely? Well, if you quickly here on screen, there's a pseudonymization and access controls that I've mentioned, some core designs around privacy and transparency, a very collaborative approach that we've taken, lots of transparency and public logging. I'll give you examples of this in a minute. And we're trying to contribute to best practice around open science, open working and open sharing. So we are working in that open environment. And of course, this is the OpenDataSavesLives showcase and Unconference. This is about as unopen data as you could possibly have. This is not, electronic health record data like this about people's medical conditions is not something where you can work with it in the open. But you can have open science principles to analyse that data and allow us to do things in a more collaborative way, and a way that encourages trust as well. So what are some of the core features of OpenSafely that are there that sort of abide to these principles? Well, firstly, all the data management tools that are used that researchers use also produce research-ready data sets of simulated, randomly generated dummy data. So that every researcher has a full offline fictitious development environment to build their code. And only when that code, the analytic code, does the job it's supposed to do, when it's been checked by people, can it actually execute against live code. For every analysis, only the really minimal disclosive summary data is released outside of the secure environment. So that may be summary tables and figures, and only after strict disclosure checks have taken place. So there's no data going out, there's nothing that could disclose any confidential information is actually released from that environment at all. We've taken a very collaborative approach. I've mentioned NHS England and NHSX, but of course we're working closely with other groups, certainly other academic groups around the country, to try and maximise the use of the platform for the best science. So, for example, we're now working closely with the ISARIG group, and we're working with HDR UK National Core Studies groups, very closely with the Office of National Statistics team. It's been a good collaboration over the last 18 months, and also with the FOSP group, who are doing lots of interesting work into long COVID. What else? Well, all public code that's all code that's ever executed against OpenSafely is made available to the public. All jobs that are running are made available to the public. Any project that's ever been started is also visible online. And we're also trying to contribute to best practice around science, as I've said. Because of that, the analytic code needs to be written up front against dummy data. It contributes very well to a clean study design, where all analyses are defined up front to try and promote best science. So, if we look into the implications of some of that, well, what does that mean? Well, if you want to run the OpenSafely platform against your own electronic health records database, then all of the code is publicly available. You can go to the OpenSafely core GitHub repo here, and you can, with some technical skills, make sure that you can take all that code and run it against your own trusted research environment, building on the OpenSafely services and the tooling that's been developed over the last 18 months. As I said, if you want to see what's going on in OpenSafely, that's all available. So this is the day I took the screenshot. Here, you can see at jobs.opensafely.org exactly what's running. So you can see there's a COVID vaccine effectiveness study, there's a breakthrough infection study running for people who've been vaccinated, and there's some surgical outcomes data analysis that's running as well for poor surgical outcomes for people who may have had COVID. So, and you can drill into those. So if you wanted to see who was running that job, the code it was executing against the repo, all of those details are available, and they're all publicly logged and audited forever, so you can see exactly what's happened over time. Why is that important? Well, I think we're all aware how important public trust is when you're doing analyses at this scale. We've seen numerous times in numerous countries when you don't have that trust, you can't unlock the power of electronic health record data because people are suspicious of the analyses that are running, and they don't think they can see what's happening with their data. So if you look at very recently some citizen juries, 3 citizen juries that were run by the National Institute for Health Research into data sharing in the pandemic, looking at different data sharing approaches and programs, and how supportive citizen juries were of those approaches, and how supportive they were of those programs continuing post-COVID. And if you look just underneath me here, you can see that for OpenSafely, that data sharing method, 77% of people were very much in support, 23% broadly supportive, and nobody was less supportive than that. And why was that? Well, if you look at the icon, the feeling was it was supported because it was considered to be more transparent than other initiatives. People knew what was happening with their data. They knew they could see what it was being used for. And that does bring people's trust into why the data is important. So going on to some of the science. Well, our initial question, the first thing we were charged with doing was to come up with a descriptive analysis of the factors that were associated with poor COVID-19 outcomes. There's a clinical factors and demographic factors, and we did that this was published back in July 2020 in Nature, and gave a really broad description across 70 million records. Like I said, this is all at massive scale. So the biggest COVID-19 risk study that's taken place, I believe, still so far in the world. We were able to do that very quickly and publish that. Since then, there's about 30 different publications and preprints that are available. And if you go to the OpenSafely website, you can see all these publications. And there's a suite here that were published in The Lancet over the last 12 months. And the important thing really was we're trying to answer important questions. So it was questions that mattered to people, mattered about clinical decisions and about people's lives. So, for example, was it safe to take ibuprofen during the pandemic? Anecdotally, early on, there was thoughts that it wasn't. Well, it is safe to take ibuprofen. We were able to prove that. Should people living with asthma or COPD continue to take their inhalers? Absolutely, they should. It's safe to do that. Does hydroxychloroquine, quite famously, does that work to prevent serious illness for people who've contracted COVID-19 in the community? No, it doesn't. So you're able to provide the evidence base for really important questions, and we've continued to do that. As the vaccination campaign started to roll out, we were able to produce rapid reports to government around vaccine uptake. Importantly, being able to break that down into different subgroups. So ethnic subgroups, deprivation subgroups, subgroups of people living with different conditions. So this is something that was picked up by The Guardian in January, where we were able to show a massive disparity between black people over 80 who were getting the COVID jab and white people over 80 who were getting the COVID jab. And it was half as likely that a black person had had that jab as a white person. So a huge disparity. And of course that has implications to policy and to interventions to try and close that gap. Again in The Guardian, and sticking with health inequalities, I mean, a quite shocking statistic really, that we were able to show that people living with learning disabilities in England have 8 times the COVID death rate of people living without those conditions. Obviously that's a massive inequality, that we were able to show that exists. What can be done about it? How again do we close that gap? Moving forward, of course, now there's lots of concern around long COVID and people who contracted COVID and then living for a very long time with some significant symptoms. What we've been able to show is that actually, compared to the survey estimates of who's got long, the number of people that are living with this condition and what's making it back onto medical records, well, actually, there's a huge disparity there. So it's not been recorded. And if we're going to do important analyses in OpenSafely and other databases, similarly in HDR UK working to COVID-19, we need to make sure we can identify people who are living with long COVID in an accurate way, in a consistent way. And we've been able to show there's a gap there that needs closing. How will we close that gap? Well, this is very recently announced an NIHR funded study for the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the OpenSafely team, into how long COVID affects the quality of life. And it's a study to work out what the long-term care implications are of having long COVID and what the health economic consequences of long COVID could be to the NHS. As I've said, we don't have that data in electronic health record data. So we've taken an approach where we're bringing together electronic health record data and personally collected data, so PHR data, using a smartphone application that TPP freely provide to be able to collect that data. So for patients who consent to be part of this study, who've been living with long COVID at some point, they can answer questions about their quality of life and validated questionnaires about the impact of long COVID on their daily lives. That data feeds down into a personal health record collected database, which will link to the OpenSafely EHR database inside that secure platform and enable the epidemiology team and the health economics team to do that analysis across personal health record data and EHR record data together. That's the first time that's been able to be done at scale. And what we're hoping is that gives us a new route to be able to do important analyses. If we could go back at the start of the pandemic and be able to accurately collect people's occupations, for example, we've been able to do some really interesting, important analysis quickly into which frontline workers, for example, should be prioritised for vaccination or shielded the most. Lots more important work going on as the vaccination campaigns roll out. As I've mentioned, vaccination effectiveness studies, breakthrough infections in vaccinated people. And as we roll into the booster campaign and into childhood vaccinations, of course, we'll be able to do the analysis there and provide the reports to government as and when they're required quickly. So the platform continues to be very, very powerful and very useful in the pandemic. It's still set up under the COPI regulations for COVID. We're hopeful that the database may survive post-COVID, certainly support from the cities and juries to do that. But just as importantly, we're hoping that the principles around Open Safely will have a legacy. So the idea around collaborative working, open analysis of EHR data, and building trusted research environments in situ will be something that can be taken up by other groups and used so that we can really unlock the power of EHR data in a safe and secure way. So thank you very much. I look forward to chatting with you all later and being at the Unconference, and hope everyone has a great day, and thanks for the OpenDataSavesLives team. Thank you.
Well, Chris was going to be here for a bit of a Q&A, but he's had to do some work, so he's not with us, but you did get to talk to him this morning. I'd just like to say thanks to all this. Every time I hear about the Open Safely work, yes, a round of applause. It's just amazing, isn't it? It's just a bunch of people who thought we need to fix this, and they went and did that. And I think, having done some work with NHS England about pseudonymised data, we actually suggested that the trusted environment where people work on anonymised code first, not real data, demonstrate that their code can work, could be a game changer for the NHS, and they could take that to lots and lots of different applications where people are pitching dashboards, data science, which have usually a six-figure cost for the discovery phase. Here's a trusted environment, here's some pseudonymized data, shows that your code works, then we'll put it on the real data. Could be a massive game changer in how we procure new technology and new data science in the NHS. And that's just one thing that I come up with when I listen to Chris's talk this time. There are new things every time we come up about it. So radically open, super work, round of applause to Chris and all the team. And I'm really interested as well in that lots of people moan about the way TPP work. This is a big change in how they're operating as well. So lots of digital transformation happening within the supply chain as well. So fantastic work. Next up is we've got John O'Connell, then we've got Marcus Ball, and then we've got lunch and networking if you want, so you can join the tables to talk. So next up is John from South Central West NHS, the support unit down there, and he's going to talk to us about building analytical and data science capability. And I think he's not just talking about building it there, he's looking at how you build it and share across many different sectors. So hopefully you've got an invite to join. John? Here we go.
So hi everybody, delighted to be joining you all today. My name is John O'Connell, Director of Strategy and Service Innovation for SCW. We're also proud sponsors of OpenDataSavesLives. So thanks for the kind invite to be able to present to you all today. And I'm really keen to probably share with you some what I think is quite some innovative thinking that's been developed with the team at NHS England and part of Analyst X, which is Future NHS. It's regarding the Accelerator Challenge, where we're looking to accelerate safe and effective adoption of AI in healthcare. It's part of what we're classing as the Data Saves Lives Reshaping Healthcare strategy that's been published. And it's also part of the Analyst X work that we are looking to connect and empower analysts community through developing what we're classing as an online analytical hub, giving them a space to be able to share their learning, educate themselves, and promote and endorse good outcomes and such of analytics in the wider determinants. So we move forward. Why are we doing this, and why is it important? And I thought this slide was quite interesting. A bit of story from my perspective. When I was travelling around the SCW patch, come across quite a few analysts that were kind of really interested in doing advanced data analytics. They were kind of what I class working in Horizon 1 space, which is the current state of play. They were working on what we class as descriptive analytics, very much around business as usual and working with Excel. But the passion that they had was kind of in working Horizon 3, the future state. They wanted to look at and work towards what we class as advanced, prescriptive, and predictive analytics using kind of AI and machine learning and tools such as Python and R, and that was kind of where their passion was. But what they were basically saying is that's their passion today, but they didn't have anything to do in their day job in a sense to apply the newfound skills they had. And sadly, what tends to happen is you'll get people that will learn these new skills, but either leave the NHS and move to industry, for example, because they find an opportunity to apply them. So the challenge out to us was kind of how do we change that? And we come up with the idea of working in what we class as Horizon 2, is developing something else which I was glad to come back on, is the Data Analytics Passport and the Accelerator. And the Accelerator is going to be an environment that we're going to create that allows people to safely play and use these new tools and technologies in a safe space to help supercharge what we're calling the adoption of AI in healthcare. So what's the concept? The accelerator concept is something that we class as kind of learning by doing. First and foremost, we are really strong advocates of enabling collaboration, but allowing people to connect virtually across, and it's really important, healthcare and care, but most importantly, making sure we bring on board industry partners because they can help push us farther than we think we can go today. So galvanizing the wider community as a whole. Secondly, we need to create kind of an environment that allows upskilling of analysts, giving them access to new learning modules that come through, but also giving them sort of some steer of where their future career development trajectories would likely go. And finally, the third piece, when they get involved, is give them recognition, provide national recognition of some of the great work that they do, and enable career mobility across health and between health and care, and also into the voluntary sector. And it's all in the work towards professionalisation as analysts as a profession. And the benefit of this, we think, is going to feed back exponentially back into these emerging ICSs and the new systems as we move forward. So it's a really, really exciting opportunity to be part of this new development. And this is kind of what I suppose the high-level vision looks like. And I'm going to be talking predominantly now in this space here, the AMX Accelerator Challenge. But you'll see as well that at the centre of everything that we're doing is basically creating what we're calling the analytical passport and profile that allows people to do learning, record their sort of learning journey, again, digital badges, and learn new technologies and new skills. We've also got a peer network which we are developing as well, and also you've got professional recognition from the likes of AFA and others. But in this space here specifically, we want to create an environment, a framework, and an ecosystem that allows people to come together to work on these new things. It's all well good learning, R and Python and wanting to apply those new skills, but how do you apply them in health and care? So what we are thinking of coming up with, excitingly, is an accelerator challenge. And the challenge looks like this. It's a typical challenge that would start with a launch event, very much like I'm talking to you guys today, a call to arms. And it would end with a winners podium, and there'll be lots of different winners, basically from storyteller, use of AI models or advanced modeling, best use of visualization, best use of storytelling. And the ideas that we'll do is the call to arms will provide a challenge, and it could be around, how do we help and health economy recover and restore using different data sets and using technology to understand, what we can see from these new insights by linking data together. Each team will consist of between sort of 7 to 8 members, including a leader that will join them. So it doesn't need to be one organisation, it could be a whole hybrid from different industries coming together. But most importantly, we want each team to include an apprentice. So people get upskills to see what's happening in that, and then hopefully start joining other challenges as they come through in the year. But it allows people to sort of learn as they go along. And what we mean by reward and recognition here is basically that once they've gone through and they've been part of that accelerator challenge, they get a digital badge basically for being part of that team and winning as they go through. But it'll allow us to sort of promote learning as we go along in a sense. And we're going to have different sponsors joining us as well. So the likes of AWS, Google, Microsoft are going to be hopefully giving us access to some of their sort of new tools and expertise as we move along. So the idea being here is that we learn together, and the challenge then will be able to disseminate, should we say, valuable experience across health and care together. So really, really exciting opportunity, and we're encouraging people to watch this space because we'll hopefully start hearing some stuff towards the end of this year. And just to say as well that the data sets in there will be admitted patient care, emergency and A&E, and mental health minimum data sets, And ideally, the vision is that we can start bringing in some sort of primary care data sets, but the data in its scope will sort of increase exponentially as we go along. So what does it look like, the proposed challenge? We are aiming to do the pre-pilots around about December into January next year, for 3 months until February, just to test the infrastructure. And then we launch the first pilot in around about March, April time. And that would be a call for teams to sort of join up and sign up and join the challenge. So what people get access is to an infrastructure, which is a back-end system that will give them the tools they need to apply. They'll also get access to systems like tools like R and Python. The challenge itself is going to run for around about probably 12 weeks for 100 users. They'll get full user support, and they get data model training on what a model looks like, and also access to all the different data sets and reference data as well. We also know that this doesn't come without challenge, so we think one of the key challenges we're going to have to come across is the people challenge. Getting people to release time. The NHS is busy trying to support recovery and restoration, but equally we need to know that if we don't provide an opportunity for analysts to be able to operate in this new space and apply their new skills, we're not going to be able to develop our future workforce. So the idea being is here we're going to put something together around a release to learn charter possibly. And the idea is that when people join this sort of 12-week program, they get assigned a mentor, they get a release for a resource to get necessary to join the actual journey for the number of weeks. But yeah, really, really exciting opportunity for everybody to sort of look out for. And then finally, what does success look like for us? We're hoping to, in the first year, get 80 analysts through a quarter, going through the Analyst X program. And that ideally needs to be a mix of local authority, health and care and industry working together as blended teams, and allowing for strong development of private and public partnerships, but also, most importantly, to accelerate what we're classing the safe and adoption, should we say, of AI within healthcare. But the idea thing for us is that we get better outcomes from patients by doing this and learning together, and we have opportunities for analysts to be able to work across different domains and different disciplines. Better use of data goes without saying. And then the idea being as well that once we start developing some of these models, they could be scalable. We could share these models back with emerging ICSs. But the most important thing for me, I think, is we get an upskilled analytical community, and we move up that ascendancy model, and our staff can move away from descriptive analytics to predictive and prescriptive analytics, so they get an opportunity to play in that proper space with real live data and answering some of those what we class as kind of wicked challenges. So very similar and very aligned to what you guys are doing at OpenDataSavesLives, but they're really, really passionate about this. I think it's an exciting opportunity. I just encourage anybody that's got any thoughts and would like to help support the enablement.
Thanks, John. That was amazing, really inspirational, and I think your passion was infectious. It came across. I think we're just going to invite you to the stage. So we need to give you the. I need to get the emojis, some thumbs up and a round of applause, and maybe even a wow.
Thank you.
Look at that! It's all people, but I think that and it might not surprise you. We deal with lots of people, and the challenge you face, data literacy, having people understand this, and we're hopefully going to get some questions up for you in a second. But it's not just coming to health; it's coming to all industries, and I think there's probably a piece of work to do to say, okay, where are good places to do this, where there is a real community of people who understand data. For example, Leeds, which I know best, there are a significant number of people who do data who work for gaming companies, and who also used to work for people like credit rating agencies in Leeds and other financial institutions in Leeds, who may wish to actually join these as a soft way into working in health, not just the people in health and who are health professionals who might want to develop their skills. It's not just health informatics graduates who you're looking for, is it, in this? Yeah. So let's just check to see if there's any changes. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's I think what came through clearly when I was kind of
lucky to be able to travel in the length and breadth of the UK, you come across some really talented analysts who are doing some amazing work, but it was a really unbalanced economy of giving them access to tools that, some people had great access, but what they were doing was doing a lot of this in their spare time. And then they said, look, if I learn up Python or R, I haven't got a project to be able to play in a safe space. And it's kind of something similar to what Chris Bates was saying about the open safety repository, that trusted research environment. And we came to the question, why can't we have a trusted analytical environment that people can roll their sleeves up, learn, use those new tools? You've got great tools coming through from Azure, from Google, from SageMaker, from AWS, but create sort of a parity of an environment that people can come together, experiment safely on data, learn off each other. And like you said as well, people from Leeds and other areas, again, from industry, bringing those people in to help share together and learn together. That's what it's all about, really. Exactly what we're talking about today is having that open collaborative.
We've got some questions in the chat. So there's a question about creating synthetic data sets. There's a question about using digital expert patients, so people who understand data and IT, and so get them on board.
Yep.
John from John wants to be an apprentice, but he's based in York, so
Absolutely.
Obviously, we can do that. So let's just pick the question about further and higher education. So how do we link them together? So that's a question from Marc.
Which one's that one? Let's try and find that. My questions aren't coming up. Hang on.
How could we link with university and colleges to best design courses and find the future analysts?
Absolutely, great question. No, I think absolutely having them as part of this would be really key, wouldn't it? We talk about bringing apprentices on board, but be really open to exploring that further and bringing universities in, because there's something about also setting the right questions, but having sort of an opportunity. So we'd be really open to sort of explore that further. We are still sort of finishing off our thinking on this, Paul. So anybody who's got any ideas, if they could reach out to me and the team at Future NHS, we'd really want to hear. But I think that's a really good spot there. I think from the university perspective, we want to bring people in early on, even if it's just to observe the journey and see what it feels like and what it's like, because we realise one of the challenges we've got is probably the norming, the forming, and the storming of a 12-week program of individuals to come together. And how do we sort of capitalise on that as well? So that'd be good to get people's thoughts on how we could bring people in on that basis. I think it's everyone knows that we need to do it. My experience of universities is they want to do it on their terms. You mentioned, I got triggered there when you mentioned Future NHS. I think I would suggest very strongly it needs to be outside of Future NHS, because universities can't join because they're not given permission to join Future NHS, have they? So how could they collaborate? Possibly build a website would be my who knew? Maybe use the web to do this. And then I think there's some good institutions. John Farrington from NHSX up here mentioned the Leeds Institute of Data Analytics, where they have internships which are paid internships so I think there's a cross-pollination between some of the other things that are happening and collaborating. So rather than build new things and new institutions with the bureaucracy that goes on top, try and build ones that are more effective, and we focus on what you said, which are the problems and the creating the tools that people use, and can we fix those, rather than building a big training program and all the costs that go on top of that. So that's fine. So the point that was risen about, Marc mentioned about synthetic data sets. You mentioned about creating, in our world of innovation, we call them problem statements. So here's some common problem statements. Here's a set of data that we've pulled together. We've done it at ODI Leeds, where we've worked with the water industry, where we spent 2 to 3 years getting the data in shape, 2 to 3 months, getting the data in shape, getting the problem statement, pulling people together, and then doing the output. And obviously using the data, it means it gets more, it's improved. So I think there's lots of talk in the chat. There's lots of positivity, and I feel that there's an Open Data Saves Lives special that we need to add into our work. But I think it's that pipeline, isn't it, Paul, that, if you've got some great problem statements, both even from a research perspective, but even from an applied analytical perspective, we could probably link into that pipeline with you. I think it'd be really key to do that. Absolutely. And I think the synthetic, we'd be happy to speak to others on the call and link in with Marc and others on the synthetic piece. We were probably naively thinking you could kind of create synthetic data from the NHS data, but other people say you can't necessarily do that. But we've got to try and create something that you can apply models, see something interesting, and then you apply them for the proper access to the live data. It shouldn't hold us back. So I know we've probably run against that wall a few times, but we've got to keep pushing, I think.
Yeah, and that could be used for training for people, but then also to test people when they're trying to sell stuff to us, right? Yeah. So
be great in for industry to test and test their models and applications and then see how they work. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and
get away from six-figure discovery phases which don't actually go where when we might end up with a bit of a shonky dashboard. But that's maybe
But I would see absolutely. I would see that the work we're trying to do with this accelerator actually, linking really closely in with OpenDataSavesLives with those problem statements and bringing questions forward on that as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, John. Round of applause again. And we're on to the last one before lunch, which is Marcus Ball. Then we're going to have a lunch break, and we're going to leave the social room open. And then it's 2:00. Myself and Marc Farr will kick off with a bit of a review of OpenDataSavesLives, and then hopefully you people will stick around for an hour or so to help us shape what we want to do next. So something like training, synthetic data, all of those things. I think that things are going to come out as things that we need to do next as part of OpenDataSavesLives. Thanks very much, John.
Pleasure.
And next up is Marcus Ball, who's going to be talking about open source is the only way. I can get on board with that.
Hi, I'm Marcus Ball. Thank you for inviting me to speak about open source at OpenDataSavesLives, the Unconference. Unfortunately, I'm also speaking at another conference on pretty much the same topic today. So I've recorded my talk for you, and hopefully you'll enjoy the video version. I've put some links to the slides, and I've also put some other things at the end of the presentation that you might be interested in. Okay, so open source for medicine. Open source is the only way for medicine. My name is Marcus Ball. I'm a GP in Yorkshire. I'm a software developer, clinical informatician, and I spend a lot of time running discourse forums for health-related topics. I'm also a founder member of the Public Money Public Code Collective, which you might be interested in finding out more about. The link is clickable in these slides. I was previously an emergency physician and an anaesthetist in hospital, so I've got a range of sort of medical perspectives. And these slides are at that link there, that bit.ly marcusball-odsl will get you to these slides, which are publicly available on GitHub. So, open source is the only way for medicine, and this is something I firmly believe. This is a picture of an alchemist, software developer, clinical informatician, and I spend a lot of time running. Also, a founder member of the Public Money Public is clickable in these slides. I was previously an emergency physician and an anaesthetist in hospital, so I've got a range of sort of medical. So, open source is the only way for medicine, and this is something I firmly believe. This is a picture of an alchemist's workshop, I guess you could call it, from several hundred years ago. Now, alchemy was a precursor to science, but it didn't make an awful lot of progress, primarily for various different reasons, because they didn't share any of their progress. So they all kept their alchemical formulae secret because they were all worried that someone else would beat them to the end goal of alchemy, which was to develop the elixir of life kind of thing. Well, we know that was a myth, but actually, accidentally, a lot of alchemy did produce scientific advances, but they weren't shared, so they didn't really take hold. It wasn't for another couple of hundred years until people started writing about their discoveries and sharing those pretty much openly within the scientific community. and then you start to get this building on the shoulders of giants phenomenon where people don't have to start from absolutely nothing in order to make a new discovery. So you can build on previous discoveries. And we've got a refinement here where journals are now becoming more popular and being used for medical things. I just love the terminology they've used here. This is, I can't remember the date on it, 1844, the American Journal of Insanity, which is incredible. And now we've got things like this, which is a much improved way of sharing data. We can now pretty much get any paper that you want. There are still some serious problems with academic publishing, mainly that it isn't as open as it should be, but things are getting more open. It's certainly easier to obtain the information if you go to there are sites that perhaps are illegal that can share this kind of information, which is interesting. But that has changed the way that we share information. So how does this apply to medicine? Well, I'm talking particularly about the software that's part of medicine. And it has become an intrinsic part of medicine, so you can't really separate now software from medicine. Maybe even a decade or two ago, the software that's being used in medicine was really simple admin systems for, tracking patient demographics and stuff. And so it was like a card index. It was nothing clever. But now we're at the situation where we're talking about decisions being made by software, decision support, alerting for physicians, even AI is being used in clinical care, and yet these things are not open. But the rest of medicine is open. All of medicine is openly published, peer-reviewed, verifiable, auditable. It's one of the central tenets of evidence-based medicine that you have to be able to verify that something is true and that it can be replicated by other researchers, and then it gradually becomes accepted as this treatment is beneficial to this condition, rather than these just being wild assertions. And yet in software in medicine has been given a free pass, as far as I can see, to make wild assertions. It has no real evidence base, and a lot of it is increasingly dangerous, actually. Why else might you go for open source? Well, medicine is a hard problem. I've seen many large monolithic services and systems fail to meet simple challenges. Work that I've recently done on Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health digital growth charts has taken 20 years to become something that can be digitized and put into a digital system. But the monolithic approach has not achieved that. It's the open source approach that has achieved that. Iterative development seems to work well for large difficult things. The internet is a good example of that, and open source does iterative better than anything else, primarily because everybody can iterate on it rather than just the owners of the code. There is another thing about when hard problems exist. Is it really ethical to make many people solve those hard problems multiple times? An example would be if it's hard to build a particular decision support system to support maybe choice of oncology treatment, should you allow one bunch of people to solve that problem once and put it into one electronic health record, a proprietary system, and then it be solved again using more brains and more brain power and more energy and, of course, more taxpayer funding usually, and all of that rework is ridiculous when you think that this problem has been solved. Can't we all use the same solution if we're absolutely certain that it's right? And of course, the more people you have working on the solution, the more certain you can be that it's right. So resolving a solved problem is a waste of time, money and brains. This is comes from Eric S. Raymond, who's a kind of father of hacker culture, and he talks about no problem should ever have to be solved twice, which is kind of what I'm talking about. He's talking about software problems, but I'm talking about medical software problems. Creative brains are a valuable limited resource. They shouldn't be wasted on reinventing the wheel. It's your duty as a hacker, and in this case he's talking about hackers, not people who maliciously exploit systems, but hackers who tinker with systems and improve them, and the 1970s understanding of the word hacker. He's talking about a moral duty to share information, which of course we have in medicine. When it's a moral duty to share information for direct care of the patient, it's a moral duty to share a knowledge base and to teach other doctors. As you learn, you are also expected to pass that on. So it's got to be a moral duty to share the software, and open source is the way that we do that. Quality is something that is quite important when it comes to medical devices, because we want to know that they're safe, that they are secure, that they have been tested. And at the moment, we don't know any of those things. The alchemist, who's got their private, proprietary, secret recipe for this software, they say it works, and that's as far as we've got. So when you buy a piece of software, it's asserted that any of the systems we use in the NHS are safe. But do we know that they're safe? Well, we only know what we've been told. We might find an error, and good luck to you if you find an error in a proprietary system trying to get that fix. I know from personal experience it's not easy. Coming on to that, improvements. If you have an open source piece of software and you've got the skills to improve it, you can. It doesn't mean that the owner of that software has to take your improvement, but it might just suit your needs to have a tweaked version. Not for everybody, but that is an option. If you want to improve it and you don't have the skills, you can hire someone to do it. If you improve it, it can be shared with the community, and it might even be adopted into the core project. And in return, you get everybody else's community developments. So that answers the question of, why should I pay for this extra feature to be added to the system, to my open source system? Well, if I've got 50 other NHS trusts using the same open source system, and we each build one feature, we all get 49 features for free, and one feature that we had to pay for. Now that's incredible value for money, and you will not get that in any other model. So why aren't we doing open source? I have no idea. Clinicians not directly employed in software are more likely to contribute to an open source project than a closed source project, and I think this is because the ethos of medicine is very much around sharing knowledge. And so what we don't like is if we contribute into a project and then that project becomes proprietary. The question arises, well, how did my free NHS contribution of knowledge become your property to sell? Whereas with open source, you don't have that. Everybody benefits. It benefits the third world. It benefits developing countries. It's a completely global good. The NHS actually does understand this very well. So it has an intrinsically sharing philosophy. We share the risk of illness and we derive protection from that. So we all pool our resources into essentially a big global and very high value for money insurance policy. We share medical knowledge as well, and we go to we contribute to journals, we go to conferences, we talk and we share organisation knowledge with networks and forums and things like that. So the NHS kind of gets this already. Medicine gets it already. The internal market of the NHS does not get it, and that is one of the sticking points. NHS procurement does not get it, and I think a lot of NHS non-clinicians also don't get it, including some of the people who I think probably should be more open to open source in terms of, people who make decisions in medical IT. I think often actually don't understand open source at all, which is quite sad. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about the Chamberlain forceps. This is an example of closed source medicine and how it backfires. So we, as medicine, we're an old profession, and we've been round this house many times before. So medical software is doing it for the first time, and we're in a position to advise them. The Chamberlain forceps were a pair of obstetric forceps, and they were found in an abandoned house after being under the floorboards, I think it was, for about 150 years. And when they were found, it was apparent that these forceps had been in use several hundred years prior by this Chamberlain family who used to provide obstetric services to the rich and famous of Europe. And they kept the existence of the forceps secret. They would go into the house, blindfold the mother, send everyone else out of the room, deliver the baby if it was an obstructed labour, using obstetric forceps that really did look very much like modern Keelan's forceps. And they would put them back in the box, everybody goes away happy, but they kept it secret. So during that 150-year period, when they kept these forceps secret, there was only a couple of pairs in existence, which they owned. How many mothers and babies would have died through obstructed labour that could have been saved by the knowledge that these forceps could provide relief of that obstructed labour? Well, I would guess it would be in the tens or hundreds of thousands or maybe more, based on the population at the time. But whatever the numbers are, it's a crime against humanity to have a medical innovation and keep it secret. And if we extend that now back to software, the software is just a machine. It's just a way of programming a tool to do things. It's medicine. And if it's a medical innovation and you keep it secret, you're committing a crime against humanity. And I realise that's a kind of an extreme view, but I've brought you along the journey here. I think if there's any step in the journey that you would like to take issue with, I'll be in the Q&A at the end. Hopefully, get some good debate about this, because I like to challenge things. I like to shake things up a bit. But yeah, how can you defend an ethical stance of having something as groundbreaking as, say, an AI that can choose the right oncological treatment and keep that secret, proprietary, and charge top dollar for it? So I'm going to cover off some open source myths, just because I find they're often things that get brought up. But open source is free, so it can't be commercialized. Well, that's just not true. Yes, you give away the code, but the services around that code, which people are going to need, are not necessarily free. So you might provide the software as a service, because people don't necessarily all want to self-host this stuff. You might provide warranties and maintenance and support around that, further development, add-ons, plugins. If you look at the world of WordPress, which is an open source content management system that constitutes roughly 30% of the whole internet, that is an open source ecosystem. It's become a livelihood for hundreds of thousands of developers, and not all of them work for WordPress.com or WordPress.org. So it creates a big wide world where everybody can play. You can't make money with open source. Well, I just covered that off, really. Open source is for hackers and weirdos. I think the fact that Microsoft acquired GitHub, Microsoft have just currently produced possibly the most popular code editor, which is open source, called VS Code. The big players, IBM, they are all moving into open source because they understand that the writing is on the wall. Anyone can change your code, so it must be insecure. Well, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how open source code is handled. So yes, other people can take a copy of the code and they can make modifications to that code, but they can't change your copy of the code, which is what you're running in production. You have the control of that. You also maintain a copyright over this code, so you don't lose control entirely. You still have copyright, and the open source license is what grants the rights to the users. So it's not the Wild West. It's actually a very well-regulated and well-understood community. Companies just won't make their software open. Well, we're the NHS. We're the big customer. If we demanded open source software, we'd get it, because we have suppliers who only supply the NHS. So if we say by 2029 your software must be fully open source, then they would have to comply with that or leave the market. So the reality is that open source is the age of reason brought to computing. It's a scientific method. It represents like a saved progress in the game as well. So if you build a project and the funding runs out with organisation A, but it's all open source, well, organisation B, C and D can take up the mantle and they can run with it. As it is, if you had done that with a closed source project, the closed source project just dies when your funding runs out. So open source is a saved game. We're like when you're playing a video game or something, and you can save your progress. You'll never have to go back and repeat those levels again. That is what open source is. It shares progress across the NHS. There's no other safe and scientific way to do medical computing. I would add to that, no other ethical way to do medical computing. And it's an opportunity, not a threat. You just need the right business model. The NHS is particularly well suited to this as well. I'll leave you with one other, slightly random thought, which is that we have a duty to collaborate and innovate and develop human progress, because we do not want to be still on Earth arguing and repeating the same problem solving between proprietary software and proprietary innovations whilst the Earth goes to rack and ruin. So this is an extreme example. The Earth will be swallowed by the sun at some point in its future. We have to be off the Earth as a race by then. We will not get that kind of progress if we don't just share the progress that we've already made. If we make people repeat progress and go backwards, that's a waste of brains. And for Earth annihilation, you could replace that with climate change, and actually even more topically, you could replace it with coronavirus, because we all had to collaborate a lot more quickly just in the last 18 months, 2 years. So these are the kind of thoughts I want to leave you with. And if you make software or involved in software in any way, you want to be asking yourself, why is our software not open source? If you've enjoyed my talk, I will be around in the Q&A. I've put some links in here to these slides. So bit.ly/MarcusBoard-ODSL should get you these slides live on the internet, and you can then just play with them like I have. And the links all go to other blogs I've done. I've been involved in some podcasts and webinars and things like that.
Yeah, lots of round of applause, thumbs up. I think you're preaching to a bought-in audience here, Marcus. Is Marcus here? I think here's Marcus.
Yep, I'm here.
That's it. So, Marcus, you are a lot of the statements we use, the way in which if you're not on the internet, you don't exist. Where can I find your code? Where does it live? How do I use it? How do I share it? And OpenDataSavesLives, you are in exactly the right place. So thank you very much for joining us. I think, are you out and about today?
Me, yeah, I'm at a different conference. I've been speaking at HET, Health Excellence Through Technology, about a related thing, still very open source related, but I've been building some Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health digital growth charts over the past year. So working with a Royal College to build code, which is the first time that any Royal College has done that, so far as I'm aware. And all our stuff is on github.com/rcpch. And my personal stuff is on GitHub as well, github.com/Pacharanero, Pacharanero. I've got a variety of different things that's on there. Basically, any software that I make, it has to be open source. I don't think I've been involved in any closed source development, just because of you just heard the talk. I've got a very sort of strident view on it and about the ethics of open source. So I don't do anything that's closed source.
Well, why would you? Yeah, and I think it's the red pill and the grey pill of the Matrix. Once you've realised it, it's like, why didn't we do it all this way before? So, Marc, there's a thank you in the chat about thank you for opening my eyes to open source in the NHS last year. I'm only going to use open source in the digital work we're building here in Gloucester from now on. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's from Marc. So I've been working with Marc. He's a member of the Faculty of Clinical Informatics that I've been sort of mentoring, kind of thing. Yeah. He should be mentoring me, actually. His code is way better.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, and also if you share early, share often, people will tell you if it's wrong, and you can you can move on, and then also you can find people who might have built 90% of it previously, which is the other part of the.
Well, that's it. I've got a friend one of the people who sort of introduced me to open source as an extreme view, a guy called Rob Dyke, who some of you may know from the open source community, and he used to say all code has already been written. You know, you've got to ask yourself when you are writing code and rewriting something, has someone solved this problem already? And when you go and look, very often someone has, and so then very often it's just a question of the learning curve of whatever they've built. Use their stuff, reuse it and improve it, rather than building your own custom version and rolling your own, which is, you know, as I say in the talk, it's wasteful of more brain power.
Yes, absolutely. So part of that is well, that's what we'll be talking about this afternoon. Is that how we work on that? It fits exactly with the OpenDataSavesLives Pledge 3. So we can go through that. Just why are we doing it? And it's about breaking down the traditional models of data ownership and using the web to communicate, using share. And for me, it's also one of the big things I think people confuse, and maybe add it to it, that open source is similar to open data and it's similar to open innovation, and in fact it's just being open, and once you become more open you get back more than you put in, and once that becomes a way of work, we talk about ODLEs about being radically open, and we don't have basically all of our projects are on the web. If you want to find out a project, it's written up on the web straight away. That every project has a story blog, a technical blog and a repo, and that's basically what we do. They don't exist as reports. So my ambition is to kill all reports and kill all briefing notes, and just things exist on the web as blog posts, as repos, and as code. You know, and why else would we communicate like that?
Absolutely agree, and I think, you know, we can kill all meetings, kill all briefings, and as you say, reports and particularly strategies. It's been a real bumper year for the strategy this year, especially in the NHS, and it's depressing because these strategies achieve nothing, but they tie up immense amounts of resource to produce. And then you read the strategy and you think, well, this is all, you know, motherhood and apple pie. It's all lovely, great platitudes that we can all get behind, but exactly which bit of it is now actionable? Where are we going to get this built and how? And they haven't thought that through. That's not part.
Well, we maybe can add a bit to we'll take your presentation, add a bit about being radically open, and add Mike Tyson's great comment that, you know, everyone's got a great plan until they get punched in the face, which is basically it's just that every plan just engages reality and then disappears into a bonkers world of people protecting themselves and saying, I didn't write the strategy, I didn't implement it. So Marc, you are so welcome, and I think we found a fellow traveller in our route. This afternoon we're working on what does OpenDataSavesLives do next, and getting people to join in. So if anyone else has got any, people are basically joining in and agreeing with you in the chat. There's no real questions. No one wants to yet. So the save game really resonated with people. Someone said the problems are really identical, but the open source is to assume they are. I would probably counter saying that, you know, that if you're not open, the strategy that's written assumes that you sometimes get a cookie cutter response to all problems.
I think it's a good challenge, and I think it's valid. What's interesting is actually with open source, that's how you know that your problem is not identical, because you can look at their code or their solution. But more interestingly, if everybody plays the open source game, then that enables you to spot the majority of cases where your solutions are identical. So yes, there is a danger of trying to use the same solution for all problems, but at least if we could use the same solution for, say, 80% of problems, that's 80% of new code doesn't need to be rewritten, and the 20% that are different problems, and John makes a good point, then you've got more resource to address those different problems because you're not wasting time repeating the same solutions.
So I'm just going to, we'll finish in a second, but we are talking about big cultural change, and we are talking about taking people's jobs away from them, because the usual way of a large discovery phase, a big implementation plan, writing a strategy, then setting up a team, and then start work, rather than start work early, iterate quickly, build as we go, create something, challenges a lot of the ways in which people are used to delivering projects and getting paid. How do we help people understand that this is the better way?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I genuinely believe in trying to do it by example. So in a way, I've been given an opportunity with the Royal College of Paediatrics to build something which is radically open, and it really wears it doesn't just talk the talk, it walks the walk. And we've done that with relatively small amount of resources and in a very quick time. So if we can show that the open source community can iterate faster, build quicker, be more efficient with its resources and essentially cheaper, then you make the case by doing. So other people will say, well, why are we going so slow? And your answer is because you're not using open source. And then so you're leading by example. I think that's probably the best and safest way to do it, because it keeps you in touch with reality all the way as well.
Yes. Right. Well, that's a great way to finish. And my last point is that we're going to try and help fund teams, not projects. So teams of people work, reuse the code, share it openly, so that everyone can join in. So, go on, Marcus.
Dropping a link into the chat, which is an organisation that is about public money, public code. The aim, as very much as it says, is to try and encourage where public money is being used, then the code should be public. So it's
oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's a UK arm of the Free Software Foundation Europe has a similar sort of campaign. We've just sort of taken that mantle and trying to bring it to the NHS. And a recommendation that I would have is also, if you like this kind of stuff in terms of policy, open source, and like you were saying about building teams, the guy called Waldo Jaquith is a great read. WALDO, and it's JAQUITH. If you just Google that name, he writes prolifically about this problem in the States, but it's all applicable to the thinking of our organisations here in the public sector. So really great read.
Fantastic. I think we're going to add a recommended reads book to the part of the OpenDataSavesLives. And every time I talk to people, I talk about the Clue Train Manifesto. So if you get those two books and get Clue Train, and we'll be in a good place. So thanks, Marcus. Thanks, everyone. I'll just we're going to remove you from the stage now, and I'm just going to tell people what's going to happen. So thanks very much, Marcus.
My pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye. So we're back on track. We're back on time. What's going to happen now is hopefully people have saved the game, and maybe are going to look at Marcus's slides that are available on the web. We're going to have some lunch. We're back at 2 o'clock. The way that's going to work is myself and Marc Farr are going to do a little summary of OpenDataSavesLives to date. So I can't believe it's nearly 18 months of fantastic work that we've done. Giles Dring from ODI Leeds is going to just show us how we're going to use the collaboration software, which is a Miro board. Some of you will have used, some of you won't. We're going to do two bits of that. One is to talk about everything that we might do, and then split into 2 or 3 or 4 groups to detail conversations about how we might do that. And then we'll just finish off at about 3 o'clock. So hopefully you can join us this afternoon if you have some lunch, and I will see you then. Thank you.